In the Age of Chaos, two factions battled for dominance. The kingdom of Azeroth was a prosperous one. The humans who dwelled there turned the land into a paradise. The Knights of Stormwind and the clerics of Norsha Abbey roamed far and wide, serving the king's people with honor and justice. The well-trained armies of the king maintained a lasting peace for many generations. Then came the Orcish hordes. No one knew where these creatures came from, and none were prepared for the terror that they spawned. Their warriors wielded axe and spear with deadly proficiency, while others rode dark wolves as black as the moonless night. Unimagined were the destructive powers of their evil magics, derived from the fires of the underworld. With an ingenious arsenal of weaponry and powerful magic, these two forces collide in a contest of cunning, intellect, and brute strength, with the victor claiming dominance over the whole of Azeroth. Welcome to the world of Warcraft.
Having been around for nearly 3 decades, Warcraft has seen a lot of changes in both style and storytelling. Some of it has been for the better, and some of it for the worse. Released in late 1994 for MS-DOS, Warcraft decided to expand on Dune 2's formula of building your army and destroying the enemy base, while also adding in new elements such as several new mission types. Though most of the story has been retconned at this point, both the human and orc campaigns, which show 2 different sequences of events, laid a lot of groundwork. The story and the world would be expanded upon in future titles, eventually becoming the World of Warcraft we all know today. The game is severely clunky by today's standards, but I think it's still worth looking into. While the first mission of each campaign is just a tutorial, let's talk about the humans for a minute. The player starts off as a regent given a plot of land to develop, serving under King Lane Rin III in the Kingdom of Azeroth. This kingdom would later be renamed to Stormwind, with the name Azeroth taking the title for the greater world. The Orcs first appeared 10 years prior as small raiding parties that would burn down villages and kill anything that moved. Despite their best efforts, no cleric or scholar could figure out where these monsters came from or how they came to Azeroth's shores. The only certainty was that they came and went from the eastern swamps. Recently, the attacks have become bolder and more organized. As more troops are sent to the borderlands to protect any nearby settlements, the returning scouts have confirmed that a ruthless orc named Blackhand has rallied the orcs under one banner, with one goal in mind: the destruction of Azeroth. Originally from the planet Draenor, the orcs lived as a multitude of different clans across their planet. As the orcs warred with each other, a group of warlocks discovered a small rift. After stabilizing the rift and sending a few scouts through it, they discovered a strange and unknown world. The warlocks convinced the various clans to cease their warring, hoping the prospect of a common foe would unite them. After the initial raiding parties brought back reports of their conquest in these new lands, the orcs constructed the Dark Portal. They launched an attack on the castle to the north. Though the orcs expected to crush any resistance, they were driven back by mounted knights, leaving them to retreat through the portal once more. Over the years since their failed invasion, the orcs bickered over whether the portal should be closed or if they should try again to take Azeroth. The fighting only stopped when a power-hungry orc named Blackhand seized control of the clans to create a single, unstoppable horde. If you like this content, subscribe for more. As the orc attacks grow more brazen, King Lane sends out more of his forces to reinforce and defend the towns along the borderlands. Towns such as Grand Hamlet are under a constant threat of raiding, while scouts report the orc numbers are rapidly swelling. With the orcs moving against the town, it is the player's job to roam around the map and deal with any of the orc units they encounter, having to contend with ranged archers joining the orc ranks, as well as any warriors they find. Grand Hamlet itself may not be a name that World of Warcraft players may recognize, but following the rebuilding of Stormwind, Grand Hamlet was also rebuilt. The town would be renamed, however, to Darkshire, which lies in northeastern Duskwood. With the humans using various strategies to attack the orcs in small numbers, and flee before any reinforcements can arrive, Blackhand is starting to find the humans more and more bothersome, sending the player off to crush any opposition near a small outpost in the Swamp of Sorrow, which could possibly be Kairos. The borderlands themselves are not a rigidly defined area. Instead, the term refers to the area between the Orc lands of the Swamp of Sorrows, Black Morass, and Blackrock Spire to the east, and the human lands of Elwyn Forest, Northshire, and Stormwind to the west. Although no official location has been labeled as the Borderlands, it likely encapsulated eastern Duskwood, western Swamp of Sorrows, as well as the Deadwind Pass to the north of Medivh's Tower, Karazhan. With Grand Hamlet defended, the time has come for the humans to go on the offensive. On the west side of the Swamp of Sorrows lies the Orcish outpost of Kairos, which was used for defending against any human incursions into the swamp, and was a place to launch any raiding parties into southeast Elwyn. Hoping that the destruction of the outpost would lead to a lasting peace around Grand Hamlet, the player is tasked with ensuring that any orcs there are dealt with, and that the outpost itself is reduced to rubble. The orcs would ultimately not rebuild Kairos, which lay just to the southeast of what is now Splinter Spear Junction, and instead their forces would move west to the town of Stonard, deeper in the swamp. Pushing further into the west, the humans of Grand Hamlet have been growing stronger. Tasked with destroying the town, Blackhand sends the player to an outpost with a small force to raise an army. Along with this, he specifies that no prisoners are to be taken. Except, wait a moment. We've already seen the Orcs' invasion of Grand Hamlet from the human side, with the humans emerging victorious. But now, seeing it from the Orcs' perspective, Grand Hamlet is destroyed, so which set of events occurred? Warcraft's campaigns both follow their own timelines in which their side is victorious over the other, with the two timelines being merged later to create the events that would become known as the First War. As we'll see later, these discrepancies are not just exclusive to which battles are won or lost. For the time being, however, we'll continue to just see how either timeline plays out, and then bring them together to paint a picture of what actually happened in the Warcraft canon. The Dead Mines, a name many Alliance players will remember from when they first started running dungeons. 20 months prior, the King's Champion, Sir Anduin Lothar, led an expedition down into the Dead Mines in order to search for a lost book called the Tome of Divinity. Lothar's forces had encountered resistance within the mines, and no one from their expedition had been seen since then. Most of Lothar's forces were killed during the battle, with him and his remaining soldiers taken prisoner and awaiting their execution. The abbot of Northshire Abbey had a vision of Lothar, captured, broken, and pleading for assistance. With knowledge that he was still alive, King Lane orders a rescue party into the mines to find him and his men and bring them back alive. After fighting through a mine full of ogres and confronting their leader, Turok, both Lothar and the Tome of Divinity are recovered and brought back to Northshire Abbey to heal. The humans aren't the only ones who have a problem with Turok. Blackhand's daughter, Griselda, fled from her father's watch and joined forces with the ogres in the Dead Mines. Infuriated, Blackhand orders the extermination of everyone in the mines, including Griselda. If you haven't caught on by now, both campaigns actually mirror each other. Though the story is different for each mission, the goals and gimmicks of each mission is generally the same. For each mission to destroy an outpost or make your way through a dungeon, the opposite campaign will have a similar mission. As the series became more narrative-focused, with campaigns no longer happening concurrently, this was something that would be dropped in favor of each mission being unique. The Dead Mines also serves as an example of Warcraft's innovation of mission design, sending the player through a map filled with enemies with only a small force and no base to construct more units. That means if the player makes a mistake while progressing through the level, the consequences are much more costly. Looking to take back the Borderlands, the armies of Stormwind head southwest to drive out the Orcs that have pushed into Elwyn Forest. As we start to near the halfway point of the game, we can take a brief diversion to look at how the game actually plays. While being praised at the time of its release, the game is very hard to play in 2023. The game is incredibly slow, taking a long time to get anything done, whether it's constructing the buildings, building your army, or just getting anywhere on the map. Slowing things down even further, the player can only select a maximum of 4 units at a time, and cannot set any unit groups to quickly reselect them. With melee units especially, units will often stand still if there is nothing near them, meaning destroying each enemy base is a lot more hands-on and taking care of every building. A lot of the issues can be explained as simply what the technology of the time could handle, but as home computers became more powerful, more quality of life upgrades were made with each new game release. While returning from the Dead Mines, the player's forces are diverted north to the Red Ridge Mountains. Although an orc encampment had been established in the area, it now lies under siege from human forces. Rushing to the aid of their fellow orcs, the player must both defend the encampment from the ongoing attack and seek out their stronghold in the northern section of the mountains. The human stronghold likely refers to Stonewatch, which was claimed by the Blackrock clan during the First War, and remains under orc control well after the Third War. Additionally, in World of Warcraft, a high road in the eastern Red Ridge connects between the Swamp of Sorrows in the south towards the direction of the Dark Portal, and Blackhand's Seat of Power at Blackrock Spire in the north. Perhaps this road was used to avoid any human forces down below, but there's no way to know if that was the intention behind it. If you like this content, subscribe for more. The Orcs aren't the only enemy Stormwind must worry about. A band of humans that has allied themselves with the Orcs must also be dealt with. As this group moves in on Northshire Abbey, the monks call for the aid of their king. Once the abbey has been defended, the soldiers of Stormwind track the traitors back to their encampment and lay siege to it, ending the rebellion. Years later, Northshire Abbey would become an important place for World of Warcraft, serving as the human starting area for the player to quest in and get used to the game before they are sent off into the wider world. Northshire Abbey is also a small thread that would lead into the larger concepts of human culture, and especially religion. While only healing priests are trained at the moment in the teachings of the light, their magic would later be used by warriors during the Second War to become the first paladins. In the words of the Orcs, the humans of Sunnyglade have become fat and lazy with their prosperity. The town is ripe for the taking, with their army unaware of an approaching orc invasion, so it's up to the player to not only destroy the town, but also secure the area for the horde. Notably, the orcs are interested in a tower within the town, which they hope to use to study how the humans' magics are created. Whatever it is they discovered is unknown, but considering the player unlocks warlocks in the next mission, it must have been useful. As for where exactly the tower lies, there are a few towers that can be found around Elwyn Forest, but the most likely candidate is the Tower of Azora, located in the eastern section of the map. Coincidentally, a few geographical features can provide evidence of this, as the river running along the middle of the map is similar to the river separating Elwyn and Duskwood. Many of these early locations were never really incorporated into World of Warcraft, so we can only really speculate whether they were left standing or ground down under the Orcish war machine. Sunnyglade is in ruins, and its citizens were either slaughtered or taken prisoner. Just north of the Orc encampment, the survivors have been rounded up and are being kept in a pen, soon to be shipped elsewhere to work as slaves. Before the player can actually get to work on building their base, they first need to locate where the Orcs are and free the workers. Since the player does not start with any workers or gold, at least one villager must be saved in order to advance, otherwise the player must restart the mission and try again. The concept is a unique way to start the level, forcing the player to use a small force to raid a section of the enemy base, then returning later to destroy the rest of it. While it can break the monotony of each level, the workers can die too quickly, as archers on the other side of the wall can kill them in one hit, making restarting once or twice a likely possibility if you aren't fast enough to get one to safety. Blackhand has been growing too arrogant of your victories, and it's time there was a change in leadership. Luckily, Blackhand left an opening in his personal troops, which the player can exploit. A key outpost in the Black Morass serves as a pivotal center for supply lines between the front lines and Blackrock Spire. With the destruction of this outpost, Blackhand's power will wane and allow the player to seize control of the Horde. With the outpost destroyed, the Shadow Council that rules the Horde from behind the Warchief saw how weak Blackhand had become, but also how swiftly the player rose to power. Ordering Blackhand's assassination, the player is then put in control of the Horde and entrusted to end the war. Another dungeon crawl. The villainous warlock Medivh has begun to drain the land of its energy and harnessing it for some terrible scheme. Entering his Tower of Karazhan, the player's limited army must contend with spiders, slimes, skeletons, elementals, and demons summoned by Medivh as they make their way to him and kill him. Entrusted by the Tiersguard Council with great arcane power, Medivh stands as the guardian of Azeroth. A personal friend of King Lane, Medivh was once someone that Stormwind looked to for wisdom and protection. However, the power coursing through Medivh twisted his mind and drove him mad, leading him to seek forbidden knowledge and resulting in him coming across a strange other world home to the Orcish Horde. Later accounts of Medivh's death would have only a select few warriors entering Karazhan and putting an end to him. As a personal blow, the warriors that were forced to make the hard decision to stop his madness were his lover Garona, his apprentice Khadgar, and his childhood friend Lothar. With the player now uplifted to War Chief, the first task that must be completed is a rescue mission into human lands. Taking a small force, the Orcs venture into Northshire Abbey to rescue the Horde's best spy, Garona. Garona had been carefully studying the humans and their magics, but was discovered and imprisoned within the Abbey. With the valuable information she has acquired, the war against King Lane would be swiftly ended with her aid. Northshire Abbey is raided by Orcs and burned to the ground to cover up the secrets of what happened there. With Garona recovered, and our magical secrets given over to the Warlocks, the Orcs' victory is all but assured. At this point in the game, both campaigns begin their march towards victory. For the humans, this means pushing deep into the heart of Orc lands, the Black Morass. Here, the Orcs have made several strongholds which must be wiped out. Unbeknownst to the humans, further into the southern Black Morass lies the source of the Orcish horde. The Dark Portal still stands tall among the lush swampland, but its presence has been having a tangible effect on the surrounding region. The land around the portal has been dying slowly, becoming more corrupted by fell magic. Ferns and grasses would wither, and local fauna would become sick and weak. On the other side of the portal, a similar process had occurred before the Dark Portal was ever constructed, turning the savage Tanan jungle into the barren hellscape known as Hellfire Peninsula. All of this information has been given to us in later games. Instead, in the game manual for Orcs and Humans, the portal is implied to be making the land sick and swamp-like, instead of turning it into the wasteland that is the Blasted Lands. With new magical secrets secured, the Orcs now move to take Elwyn Forest. Two outposts pose a threat to the security of their forces within the area, and so both of them must be destroyed. Admittedly, I don't have much more to say about this mission, so here's a montage of my armies getting blasted with catapults. Tragedy has struck the human kingdom of Stormwind, with a letter reaching the player that King Lane has been assassinated by the treacherous Garona. His last command was to uplift you to the war leader to finally end this unceasing war. In retaliation, the Temple of the Damned has been chosen for siege, as it remains as one of Blackhand's darkest seats of power. Only the bravest of knights agreed to undertake the mission of dismantling the temple, with any other reinforcements too terrified to approach. This Temple of the Damned is actually the first of many that would later be constructed, but this is also the only one built during the First War. It was here that the Orcs would make sacrifices to their gods, and where necrolytes would be recruited to purge the humans from the land. The great altars where the Orcs would sacrifice blood and gold would not be enough to save the temple, as nothing of it remained once the humans were finished with it. And to those wondering, no, this is not the sunken temple in the Swamp of Sorrows. With the taste of victory on their tongues, the Orcs grow more bold, pushing directly into the heart of human land. Spies have scouted a training encampment nearby, and while the soldiers there are not expecting an attack, nor have they likely seen combat before, the Orcs decide they should prove to be a good fight. Destroying such an encampment would not only greatly weaken Stormwind's forces, but also bolster the player's position as War Chief. Since Warcraft is such an early game in its genre, the innovations that it made at the time were great for maintaining player engagement. However, the vast majority of missions boil down to build an army and destroy the enemy base, leaving all but the dungeon crawl missions feeling very similar to one another. This meant that every mission would spend 20 minutes building a base and an army, and another 10 to dismantle the enemy base. The time spent building that army increases as you progress throughout the game, not because you're building a larger army, but because the enemy catapults tend to sneak in and destroy large sections of the army when I'm not looking, and I swear to God if it happens just one more time. All that stands between the armies of Stormwind and Blackrock Spire are the twin cities of Rockard and Stonard, which may be somewhat confusing for World of Warcraft players for a very good reason. During Warcraft, the map is much smaller, encompassing only the southern section of the Eastern Kingdoms. Additionally, locations such as Westfall and Duskwood had not been thought of at this point. While the given map in Warcraft does its job of guiding the player to understanding general locations, it was not something that would work for World of Warcraft. Rockard and Stonard are two locations that would later move slightly in the game's world. Both of them serve as Orcish strongholds, but no longer stand between Stormwind and Blackrock Spire. Stonard would instead move south and become a horde town in the Swamp of Sorrows, with Rockard being even further south, near the pass that allows players to move between the swamp and the Blasted Lands. After Rockard was rebuilt, it became the territory of the Dreadmaul Ogres, earning it the name of Dreadmaul Hold. If you don't know what happens in Goldshire, perhaps it's best left that way. Only two settlements stand between the Horde and Stormwind Keep. The destruction of Goldshire and Moonbrook will sever the king from his people. Goldshire is a town that human players will probably know, since it is generally their first stop after leaving Northshire Abbey, with the road north out of Goldshire leading directly to Stormwind City. The city serves as a crossroads between Stormwind to the north, Red Ridge Mountains to the east, and Westfall to the west. Moonbrook, on the other hand, is far more to the west in World of Warcraft. Many will remember it as the town just outside of the Dead Mines, filled with hostile Defias bandits, and would later become a place for refugees following the Cataclysm. Blackhand's final stronghold is all that remains, and with his supply lines cut off and any reinforcements already dealt with, the final battle begins. With the destruction of Blackrock Spire, the Kingdom of Azeroth will be victorious. With the stronghold destroyed and Blackhand slain, the Orcs bow before the might of the player. Returning home, the player is rewarded with the Crown of Stormwind, as great festivities carry on for several days. People arrive from all over the kingdom to witness their new king, and the game leaves the player with the knowledge that the intricacies of court politics will be uncharted waters, but that you resolve to rule with the same just and fair hand that Lane had before you. The dark portal where the Orcs originally arrived from Draenor will be a mission to hunt down another day to forever end the Orc invasion. Victory for the people of Stormwind is a very joyous one, as the forces of good triumph over evil. In truth, however, the events that really occurred were much worse for humanity. Despite the humans managing to push all the way to Blackrock Spire, their attack would ultimately fail, and they would be forced to retreat. The Orcs would regroup their forces, and their attack on Stormwind would be a bloody battle. Great white towers would crumble under the barrage of catapults, and soldiers would be cut down by countless warriors. Stormwind Castle was stained red with the blood of King Lane, and his body tossed into the moat. A great feast full of freshly roasted meat and rivers of wine followed the sacking of the capital, with the Orcs now looking for other lands to conquer. The Shadow Council looks across the sea, while the Warlocks seek to experiment on the portal to claim more worlds. These myriad choices for conquest can hold off for the moment. The player deserves some time to put up their feet and enjoy their success. The first war ends with the victory for the Horde. While the idea of having two separate timelines worked in Warcraft's favor, it did present problems by the time Warcraft 2 was being worked on. Elements of each campaign would be mixed to create what is now considered to be the First War. For the most part, each campaign happens as presented, with the Orcs claiming victory in the few events where both sides of the conflict were shown. Following the death of Medivh, the forces of Stormwind are free to push north and take Blackrock Spire, but at the last minute they faltered. Instead, it was the Orcs that claimed victory when they sacked Stormwind City. This prevents a starting point for Warcraft 2, with the Orcish hordes moving north. Additionally, a number of characters were introduced in Warcraft 2 that were retroactively added into the First War. Many details were changed for the characters that were present in Warcraft, and with the addition of new characters, I'll wrap up some of the more important changes in the following videos. Something that you might have picked up on is that King Lane dies twice throughout the game. During the human campaign, he is assassinated by Garona, while during the Orc campaign, he lives long enough to be killed during the attack against Stormwind. In a way, both events are true, and serves as an example of how some stories from Warcraft were combined to create the First War. Rather than serve as an Orc spy, Garona was an emissary sent to Medivh and eventually came to the court at Stormwind following his death. There, she gained the trust of King Lane and became a close ally. However, the Shadow Council gave her the order to kill Lane, and unable to resist their command, she stabbed her friend in the back, as his son, Varian Wrynn, watched from the shadows. As Garona wept over Lane's body, Stormwind was being sacked by the Horde, made all the easier in the confusion over their dead king. Although Lane does not live to see the defeat of the Orcs, his bloodline does continue, as Varianrin would become the king of the Alliance. Blackhand is the first villain introduced in Warcraft, and that has a lot of weight behind it, but that doesn't mean he was much of a character. He only really serves as a threat for the humans to rally against, and an obstacle for the player to dethrone, and take the Horde for themselves. Blackhand was mostly known for his brutality and battle tactics, and the story he was given later only adds to this fact, while also feeding into his own sense of ego. He was easily manipulated, and while he seemed to be the leader of the Horde during the First War, he became little more than a puppet for the Shadow Council. The legacy of Blackhand endures with his two sons, Rend and Maim, ruling over the Blackrock and offshoot Blacktooth Grin clans in Blackrock Spire. While many of the other clans would join the Horde that would become playable in World of Warcraft, the Blackrock clan believed them to be weak and established their own Dark Horde. When we first see Lothar in-game, we are rescuing him from the Dead Mines. After that, he is never mentioned again except for in the game manual. The manual mostly talks about his relationship to the king as his champion, but not about where he was during the First War. The player manages to free Lothar and then leads a number of attacks against the Horde, killing Medivh and becoming the new king of Stormwind. This unnamed player character is just referred to as the Defender of the Crown, but it makes much more sense if the player is actually Lothar. Assuming we play as someone else when we rescue Lothar, then it would be Lothar that leads the king's armies against the Orcs. Many of the player's achievements are given to Lothar, such as slaying Medivh, and he is the one that becomes the leader of the Stormwind survivors, traveling north to Lordaeron to seek aid for his people, and create the Alliance to fight back against the rampaging Horde that destroyed his homeland. Unlike the human counterpart, the Orc player is definitively a named character. Doomhammer's story reworked a lot of what happened during the Orc campaign. Originally from the Blackrock clan, Doomhammer followed Blackhand through the portal and led his armies across the countryside. However, Doomhammer's rise to Warchief is much different than the game. He challenges Blackhand to an honorable fight to the death called Mok'Gara and emerged victorious. When it came time to save Garona, she wasn't willing to part with the knowledge of the location of the Shadow Council, and thus he tortured it out of her, then killed nearly every member of the Shadow Council. With his power secured, he led the Orcs to victory. Doomhammer is officially introduced in Warcraft 2, where he leads the Horde north and serves as Warchief heading into the Second War. When the player is finally tasked with slaying Medivh, the only information that we are given is that he is a powerful warlock that is killing the land and summoning demons. As an excuse for the player to go and kill him as a one-note villain, that's all the justification they need, but the information in the game's manual reveals a much more interesting backstory, which has been improved upon over time. Medivh is the son of two powerful mages, and his body is overflowing with magic strong enough to kill his father, and put Medivh into a coma that lasted for years. When he finally woke up, his magic drove him insane, and in his madness he created the rift that allowed the Orcs into Azeroth. Perhaps the biggest change to Medivh's story was the introduction of Sargeras, the leader of all demons in World of Warcraft. In later retellings of the story, Medivh's madness is caused by a fraction of Sargeras' being implanted into Medivh before he was born. Over time, the corrupting influence of the Demon Lord led to Medivh working directly with the Orcs to open the Dark Portal. While the Orcs started off as an independent army, this did not stay that way for long. Rumors swirled that the leader of the Shadow Council, Gul'dan, entered into some sort of pact with demons. This pact damned the race of Orcs and set the story in motion. Gul'dan made a deal with the demon Kil'jaeden to bind the Orcs to his will, convincing the Orcs to drink the blood of the pit fiend Mannoroth. This turned the Orcs' brown skin into a fell green, and they were consumed with demonic bloodlust. After conquering all others on their homeworld, Gul'dan was contacted by Medivh to bring in the Horde and destroy Azeroth in exchange for godlike power hidden deep in the tomb of Sargeras. Sensing that Medivh was under attack, Gul'dan probed his mind for the tomb's location, only to fall into a coma with Medivh's death. Without Gul'dan to keep everyone in line, his puppet Blackhand and his Shadow Council were both slaughtered. Personally, I think Gul'dan is the first truly great villain introduced into Warcraft. Khadgar plays a large role in Warcraft 2's expansion, but he is given some story in the first Warcraft. Khadgar was an apprentice of the Kirin Tor mages that was sent to study under Medivh with the intention of using him as a spy. Although hesitant at first, due to the twisting nature of Karazhan and Medivh's mood swings, he resolved himself and passed every test thrown at him. In time, he became Medivh's caretaker. However, as a shadow grew over Medivh, Khadgar discovered that his master was the one to open the Dark Portal. Along with Garona and Lothar, Khadgar confronted Medivh. Although the battle ended with Medivh's death, it had taken a toll on Khadgar. Before the Guardian's fall, he attempted to drain the life from Khadgar, leaving him a wizened and feeble old man. Although the powers of a Guardian would be lost to him, Khadgar would take up Atiash, the staff of his former master. Oh, poor Garona. Initially, Garona is simply just a Horde spy, but her role would be expanded. Garona was a crossbreed of both Orc and Draenei blood. After her clan was wiped out, she was taken in by Gul'dan, who magically aged her and tortured her into becoming his ideal assassin. Having a talent for language, she learned the language of humans from their prisoners, and was sent to Karazhan as an emissary to Medivh. As the two of them grew closer, Garona sought the humans as a means to escape Gul'dan. Unfortunately, the Guardian was driven mad, and Garona was forced to aid in his death. During the battle, she saw visions of herself murdering King Lane, one of the only people to treat her with kindness. She fled from the tower to Stormwind, hoping to find safety. Yet, Gul'dan's hold on her mind was too strong, and only too late did Garona realize her mistake as she reluctantly carried out the assassination. Some people may be wondering what happened to Garona following the First War, since she hardly appears in any of the other games. Her story was mostly told through comics, and there was quite a lot that happened. It all started with the birth of her son, Medan. And I think that's everything covered. Not all of the Orcs drank from the blood of Manaroth. The Frostwolf clan refused to drink the blood and stood against Gul'dan and his fell magic. The chieftain, Durotan, and his mate, Draka, would rebel against Blackhand's horde, which would ultimately cost them their lives when the Shadow Council sent assassins after them. Few members of the Frostwolf clan survived, with Durotan's son, Goel, being sent off prior to the assassination. Since Warcraft 3 is meant to be a story of the Horde and Alliance coming together, the Horde needed a good-aligned Orc, leading to the introduction of Goel growing up to become the war chief Thrall. Durotan and Draka originally only served as backstory for Thrall, not even appearing in any of the games until Warlords of Draenor. But the story they tell gives shades of grey to the story of the Orcs during a time when they were simply evil. Their story, however, is not important to the grander tale. Instead, they tell us that not all Orcs are vicious monsters. And that's the end of the first Warcraft. Up next is Warcraft 2.
The once mighty army of Azeroth lay among the blackened and charred remains of Stormwind Keep. Those that escaped fled across the Great Sea, bringing tales of the suffering they had faced at the hands of the Orcish hordes. Eager to engage in battle once again, the Orcs constructed ships of war to bear them across the Great Sea. The Orcish warriors yearned for the sounds of battle to fill the air, and looked to the far horizon for new blood to spill. Using the weapons forged by their new allies, the humans made haste to prepare for the onslaught. While dwarven cannon were being loaded, others armed themselves with elven steel and mail. United in arms with new allies against a common foe, mankind stands at the shores of destiny and awaits the coming of the Tides of Darkness.
The first Warcraft story was improvised in the recording booth by a single person. It served its purpose of giving the player meaning as to why they were striving towards victory, but there wasn't much there. Warcraft 2, on the other hand, has a much more complex story compared to the first game. Released in 1996, the game is an improvement over the first, with each army receiving new types of units, the overall game speed increasing, and quality of life improvements such as drag select and unit groups. The game also introduced new concepts to the series, such as fog of war, naval combat, and the myriad of both human kingdoms and orc clans. The story of the Second War is much more fleshed out than the First War, and with an expansion that doubled the size of the story, we have a lot more to dig into. If you want to follow along with the next story, subscribe for more. Unlike the first Warcraft, where the story generally happened in the order presented, with either campaign weaving in and out of each other, I will be taking a different approach to Warcraft 2. After spending countless hours trying to weave each campaign in a way that both makes sense to Warcraft 2's story, makes sense to the story of the Second War, and is presented in a tidy manner, I have reached the conclusion that the game's timeline conflicts too much with the events presented in other accounts of the Second War. Instead, the story of Warcraft 2 will be presented with its missions out of order. This new order will instead mirror the order of events from the novels and the Chronicle. As frustrating as it is, this is simply the easiest way for me to display what happens. 6 years after the Dark Portal first opened, Doomhammer ponders the future of his people. With Stormwind in ruins and the humans purged from the land south of Blackrock Spire, this world could potentially be a new home for the Orcs. However, those that fled to the north are sure to warn others of the Orcs' presence. It would be better, Doomhammer decided, if the Horde sailed north to crush any resistance before they can mobilize and threaten their supremacy. With their resources drained from the First War, Doomhammer turns his eyes to the dwarven lands of Cosmodan. Doomhammer himself would lead a siege against the capital of Ironforge, sending the Blacktooth Grin clan to pillage the lands, and make their way north towards Stromgarde. Their first stop would be to take the city of Dun Modur, which lay as a key strategic point that connected Cosmodan to the south and Stromgarde to the north. It would be the first of many to fall. The ogre warlock Cho'Gall has decided to personally check the refineries in Grim Batol, a dwarven city abandoned by the Wildhammer clan. There, the Bleeding Hollow worked hard at maintaining the refineries to fuel the ships to carry the Horde north. Cho'Gall himself was a massive two-headed ogre that served as an apprentice to Gul'dan. During the First War, he offered to attempt to lead the unruly Twilight's Hammer clan when Blackhand was threatening to wipe them out. They believed that the Horde was a harbinger of a doomsday prophecy known as the Hour of Twilight, and crossed over the dark portal into Azeroth. However, once they set foot on the new world, the Twilight's Hammer would go into a frenzy as they heard the whispers of a dark force beneath the earth. Cho'Gall used their beliefs to align them to the Horde, pleasing Blackhand, and elevating himself to their chieftain. He did not believe in their prophecy, but in time, he would come to know the truth of the old gods. Mobilizing the Horde on Draenor would have been a monumental undertaking, and impractical if Doomhammer wanted to destroy the North before they could retaliate. They would need to look for allies in this new world, but they would not need to look far. The Amani trolls despised the elves of Quell Thalas, and sought out the Horde to pledge their support in exchange for freeing their leader, Zul'jin. The ogre clans they brought from Draenor and their new troll allies would build crude ships to take them north. After Stormwind was destroyed, its riches fell to the hands of the Horde, who had no need for gold. The goblins of the Steamweedle cartel, however, had a lust for gold and offered their services. They would supply ships, maps, and information for the Horde. While Doomhammer could have simply crushed any resistance and taken the help of his new allies, that was Blackhand's way, and he was determined to lead a better example. Under his leadership, his allies would be treated as equals to the Orcs. As refugees from Stormwind arrived in Lordaeron, King Tyrannus Menethil called for the Council of Seven Nations. Lothar called for the creation of the Alliance to stand against the Orc Horde, but not all were convinced. Gilneas believed that they could stand alone, while Alterac argued there was no hope against the Orcs. It was one of Lordaeron's famed priests, Turalian, that rallied the Council into action, and pointed that the Horde would not be stopped unless they stood together. Stormwind had already fallen, and it was only a matter of time before they were next. The vote was unanimous to form the Alliance, and it was Anduin Lothar that was entrusted as the commander of their military efforts. His first order was to organize humanity's forces to Hillsbrad to stop the Horde's advance before it could reach too far to the north. When Gul'dan awoke from his coma, he found the Horde different than when he left it. With Blackhand as his puppet, Gul'dan ruled the Shadow Council, and the will of the Horde was his will. But with Doomhammer in charge, and the Shadow Council gone, he had few allies left. Gul'dan convinced Doomhammer that he could still be useful to the Horde, as he was one of the few surviving warlocks. Doomhammer did not trust Gul'dan, but agreed to let him live, so long as Gul'dan continued to serve the Horde. Thus, Gul'dan began to work on the most perverted of his creations. Taking the hearts from the corpses of his slain council members, he intended to resurrect them once more. Though the Orcish dead were seen as sacred, the corpses of Stormwind Knights would make perfect vessels. Gul'dan infused the souls of the Shadow Council into the bodies of the slain knights, raising them as blasphemous Death Knights. Armed with necromantic magic, they would serve the Horde during the Second War. A convoy of elves passing through Taran Mill would be captured by the Amani Trolls, an enemy of theirs from ancient times. Once they had been freed, Lothar looked to Quel'Thalas for aid. As a descendant of King Thoradin, he called upon an ancient oath the High Elves swore to when the humans helped the elves during the Troll Wars. King Anasterian's Sunstrider was reluctant, but sent a small fleet to the Alliance regardless, not seeing the Horde as a major threat. Despite this, some elves chose to join the Alliance of their own volition and fight against the Orcs. Though Lothar was disappointed with the official response from Quel'Thalas, he welcomed all who arrived, especially the famed elven archers. When Northshire fell, the priests fled north with the people of Stormwind. The power of the light was a powerful force, but the clerics were ill-suited to combat. Archbishop Alonsus Fowl and Lothar would come together to come up with a solution to this problem. A number of priests and warriors were trained stringently in both magic and combat to create the first paladins. They would form the order that would become known as the Knights of the Silver Hand, named after the legend of the Silver Hand and the legacy of Keeper Tyr. They would accompany the forces of the Alliance to Hillsbrad. 5 paladins would stand above the rest and would be given enchanted librams to become the embodiments of core tenets of their faith. Uther, the first paladin, would hold justice. Saidan Dathrahan would hold holiness. Tyrion Fordring would hold retribution. Tyralion would hold protection. And lastly, Gavinrad the Dire would hold compassion. When Stormwind fell, a strange artifact was discovered and gifted to the Dragonmaw clan for study. Its purpose would not become clear until after the attack against Khazad-dûm. The Red Dragon Alexstrasza was searching for the mysterious artifact known as the Demon Soul, and her hunt led her straight to the Horde. Figuring out the Demon Soul's magic, Necros Skullcrusher used the Demon Soul to subjugate Alexstrasza and bring her to their new fortress of Grim Batol. There, the Dragonmaw would force Alexstrasza to lay eggs, which would be magically induced to hatch. The whelps would be broken from birth into deadly mounts for the Horde to use. The other members of the Red Dragonflight were fearful to retaliate, as they worried the Dragonmaw would kill their matriarch if they interfered. Many of the Red Dragonflight were captured and enslaved, such as Alexstrasza's consort, Tyrannostraz. But others, such as Coriolstraz, would work in secret to free his kind. Despite their best efforts to hide, the Horde fleets would be discovered by the Alliance. The Warchief had his eyes set firmly on Lordaeron, knowing that if it fell, the rest of the human lands would quickly crumble. Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore led the Kultiran fleet against the Orcs and began to lay waste to their ships. As Kultiras was primarily a seafaring nation, it had a lot of experience with naval combat. As countless Horde soldiers drowned and ships were blown apart by cannon fire, Doomhammer called in his secret weapon. Although Necros was a bit hesitant since the dragons had yet to be properly trained, he sent riders to tear apart the enemy fleet. The gamble was a success as the Kultiran fleet burned beneath the dragon's flames. Proudmoore was forced to call for full retreat as the Horde pressed on towards Lordaeron. Doomhammer's forces made landfall in Hillsbrad and began to make their way towards the Alterac Mountains, which would serve as a direct, if treacherous, path towards Lordaeron. With the Alliance forces rushed into the area without any pre-existing defenses, the Horde crushed all opposition. Death Knights led the charge against the Hillsbrad countryside, and the human defenses buckled under their terrifying onslaught. It would not be long before the Knights of the Silver Hand would rally the forces in the area and strike back against the Horde. Death and holy magic were flung at either side, with the Kirantor mages of Dalaran raining fire upon the Orcs. With the Paladins restoring the morale to the human forces, the Battle of Hillsbrad would be a long and drawn-out conflict, with neither side claiming victory. As the battle in Hillsbrad continued, a stalemate began to develop, and Doomhammer decided to look at other avenues to take Lordaeron. The Amani trolls knew the area well, and reminded of his promise to free their leader, scouts were sent to find him. Finding him in a prison camp near Durnhold Keep, Zul'jin was freed and led the Orcs into the hinterlands. Although initially reluctant to join, the prospect of destroying the elves in Quel'Thalas that had stolen the land of his people was too big of an opportunity to reject. The Horde would encounter dwarven resistance in the hinterlands from the Griffin-riding Wildhammer clan, and in the ensuing chaos, Scarona escaped from her jailer into the surrounding wilderness. Breaking through the Wildhammer defenses, they would go around Alterac and into the lands of Lordaeron. With the Orcs advancing north, actions must be taken to ensure that the local towns and villages are well defended. One such town that Lothar had stationed troops at is Tyr's Hand. Known as the City of Churches, it was home to a large abbey consisting of a main hall, hall of arms, and a library. The town would become heavily fortified with a barracks and blacksmith constructed in the city to supply troops with lodgings and arms, but it served a much more important purpose during the Second War. To the elves of Quel'Thalas, Tyr's Hand was one of their major supply lines with Lordaeron. As soldiers marched into the area to increase its protection, the local peasantry fell into a state of revolt, fending off the Alliance military. The Alliance army swiftly organized and was forced to fight against their own people, quelling the uprising. Only later would the revolt be revealed to be a diversion. Spies had sown chaos in the area in the hopes of covering up an Orcish mining facility located nearby. The Alliance would soon learn that a traitor exists in their midst. Gul'dan, hoping to sow chaos between the human forces to the west and the elves to the east, set his eyes on the island of Cerdero. There rests a monolithic elven runestone that was meant to protect the island. The navy present in Daramir Lake would swiftly fall before the might of the Horde, and Cerdero would be wiped away in a tide of blood and broken stones. With the runestone secured in Orcish hands, Gul'dan got to work. The runestone was thrumming with elven magic which would be perverted and carved into to create altars, called the Altar of Storms. Though much of the powerful magic wielded by the warlocks was lost when Doomhammer called for their extermination, Gul'dan used these altars to imbue their ogre allies. The ogres were simple and brutish creatures, but with the twisted elven magic, they were uplifted into intelligence. Now cunning and devious, they would serve the Horde only for as long as it would benefit them. With the Knights of the Silver Hand keeping watch over the Northlands, Archbishop Fowl's assistant, Uther, went from town to town to offer comfort and healing to any that are suffering from the war. As they head to the island city of Cerdero to help them recover from the recent orc attack, they are intercepted by the Stormweaver clan. Daramir Lake was alight with cannon fire and the breaking of ships as the conflict drew the humans closer to Cerdero. However, the orcs were not their only concerns, as human pirates were also on the hunt for Alliance forces. With their destroyers and battleships distracted, transport ships managed to sneak through the enemy navy and escort Uther safely to the shore. As the battle turned in the Alliance's favor, the orcs retreated and a number of pirates would be captured as prisoners. Following the Second War, Cerdero would be restored and the manor built on the island would become the home to the greedy Barov family. A number of renegade human and elven prisoners were captured during the conflict at Cerdero, wearing the red colors of Altera. Of special interest to the Alliance, Lothar orders that they are to be transported to Lordaeron for interrogation. As the prisoners are being escorted through the Eastweald towards Stratholme, they are intercepted by the Orcish Horde. Moving through the snaking river and then crossing the lake, a preliminary interrogation is performed as mages look through the minds of the pirates from afar. Whatever they found was not good, as they would be swiftly transported west towards Capital City. Curiously, in a previous version of the game that was changed before its release, the recovered prisoners were actually a number of orc warriors, along with the villainous warlock Gul'dan. While the storyline would never see a conclusion, one has to wonder what might have been had they not changed it. One thing that Doomhammer learned from the Battle of Hillsbrad was that the Alliance would be much more difficult to conquer than Stormwind had been. The strength of their Death Knights was matched by the opposing Paladins, and so Doomhammer would need all of the support he could get. Although heading to Quel'Thalas was much more north than he would have liked, the support of the Amani trolls would be instrumental in taking Lordaeron, which meant fulfilling his end of the bargain with Zul'jin. Quel'Thalas would fall. While the Horde marched to the north, a small force was left behind to cut off any support to the Elves. Tyr's Hand was a major supply line directly to the Elves, and with an Orc mining facility already set up in the region, a stronghold would be set up in Tyr's Bay to cut off any resources through the area. With the help of the Ogre Magi, Tyr's Hand would burn, and from the ashes an Orc stronghold would be constructed. With their navy keeping a sharp watch over the area, the Elves would be on their own. After clearing up Tyr's Hand, the small force moves west towards the port town with intentions of laying waste to it. Stratholme was a major supplier of oil to the Alliance, and as a large shipment was to be sent towards Lordaeron soon, the Horde could not allow its refineries to continue operation. With their offshore oil platforms burned and the shipment now in the hands of the Horde, they would head towards the north and regroup with the rest of the Horde. There, Zul'jin returned to the Amani capital of Zul'Aman and rallied his people to joining the Horde. The army that marched against the Elves was unlike anything they had seen for hundreds of years, as fell-drunk orcs and trolls pounded at their doorstep. The Elves had a number of magical runestones similar to those in Caer Darrow erected in order to shield their presence and the powerful energies of their font of power, the Sunwell. The runestones also had the added effect of limiting the magic of the Death Knights and troll witch doctors, but with their destruction, new altars of storms were constructed. The assault of Quel'Thalas had begun. Though Turalyon and the forces of the Alliance arrived to support the Elves, they were too late. Doomhammer's forces pushed through Eversong Woods and forced the Elves to retreat within the city of Silvermoon. The Dragonmaw had trained a number of red drakes, which descended upon elven lands and burned all who were unfortunate enough to fall under the shadow of their wings. King Anasterion needed little convincing from this point, and fully pledged his people to the Alliance. Not since the Troll Wars had the Elves been slaughtered in such numbers. Within Silvermoon, the Elves erected a great magical wall by drawing energy directly from the Sunwell, which not even the Dragon's Fire could breach. The destruction of Quel'Thalas had never been a priority, and although his pact with Zul'jin had yet to be fulfilled, Doomhammer set his sights to the west. Gul'dan promised Doomhammer that his Stormreavers could bring down the shield, and so Doomhammer diverted his forces towards Lordaeron, hoping to catch the Alliance by surprise. Only too late would he realize Gul'dan's true intentions. Gul'dan had always planned to betray Doomhammer, and with the perfect opportunity, he led the Stormreavers out into the ocean, along with Cho'Gall and his Twilight's Hammer. There, Gul'dan would drag the Broken Isles from the seafloor and open the tomb. With grandiose promises of power to be gifted to all who helped him, Gul'dan would lead a number of warlocks inside. Although the circumstances remain unknown at this point, Gul'dan would die within the tomb, and his skull would be turned into a terrible artifact that held the power of the warlock. The skull would be returned to Draenor as a trophy. 20 years later, a night elf named Maiev Shadowsong would find Gul'dan's writings within the tomb, as he described what happened. Trapped in the dark and foreboding vault, Gul'dan's servants abandoned him and were killed by the demons that guarded the tomb. Gul'dan himself would be ambushed, and while he fended off the tomb's guardians, he would ultimately expire before he managed to claim the power he had sought since stepping foot on Azeroth. Once word reached Doomhammer of Gul'dan's betrayal, he sent the Blacktooth Grin clan after them. Once on the Broken Shore, they were to exterminate every last member of the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans. Cho'Gall led the assault of defending the tomb, but he would eventually flee with the shattered remains of the Twilight's Hammer. They would sail west, hearing the mysterious voice that would lead them to the gates of Ahn'Qiraj, and opening the Twilight's Hammer to any race that would join their cult. Most of the Stormreavers would be wiped out, with only a few of their numbers fleeing west or remaining behind on the island, such as Drak'Thul. A copy of Gul'dan was left behind for the Blacktooth Grin to kill, thinking they had defeated the Warlock, and not following him into the tomb. The Blacktooth Grin had no intention of entering the tomb regardless. Wandering the island were a number of fearsome demons that had emerged once Gul'dan opened the tomb, slaughtering anything they came across. When the orcs left, the tomb would remain above the waves and open to others drawn to its power. Moving his forces west, Doomhammer hoped to catch the Alliance off guard. Half of their army was down in the hinterlands, and the other half was back in Quel'Thalas. Lordaeron was virtually undefended and perfect for the taking. While a number of routes existed, the most direct route would be through Alterac. Lord Paranold was already wary about the orcs when he had first heard of their march to the north, and so he met with them as the Horde approached the mountains. He would ensure that his people survive, even if it meant betraying the Alliance. A deal was struck between Paranold and Doomhammer. The Horde could pass through the mountains so long as the people of Alterac remained unharmed. Doomhammer kept his word, and what should have taken months of breaking through Alterac's barricades was only a short march. On the other side of the mountains was the mage city of Dalaran. Both Dalaran and Lordaeron were caught completely by surprise by the Horde, and Doomhammer was able to demolish the city. After Dalaran was razed, the mages focused their powers into an artifact known as the Eye of Dalaran to repair the city and rebuild its great spires. Turalyon knew that something was wrong when word reached him of the Horde's invasion of Lordaeron. However, the interrogation of the prisoners from Cerdera only confirmed his suspicions. The Orcs did not need to fight their way through Alterac, but instead, Alterac had betrayed the alliance to the Horde. Turalyon pulled his forces from Quel'Thalas and marched towards Lordaeron. As many forces as could be spared would be sent to Alterac, however, to deal with the traitors. Alterac would be locked under siege and Lord Paranold taken as a prisoner to await trial should the Alliance claim victory in Lordaeron. Alterac's defenses were put back into place, and the mountain pass was cut off. Should Doomhammer attempt to recall his forces still stationed in the hinterlands, they would not find an easy journey through the mountains. Turalyon's forces would be forced to take the mountain pass through Alterac in order to catch up to the Orcs in time. Though the city had enough food and supplies to hold out for weeks, Turalyon could only hope that the soldiers defending Capital City would be able to defend it for that long. At last, victory was at hand for the Horde. Doomhammer launched a full siege of the city with the forces still under his command. King Tyrannus would not go down quietly, however, and would join his forces on the ramparts to lead his people in battle. The city held out for many days, and while Doomhammer admired the tenacity of Tyrannus, he knew the city would not hold. Every day, more of the city's defenses would crumble, and it was only a matter of when, not if, Capital City would fall. His confidence would waver with the arrival of Turalyon's forces. Not only would Lordaeron receive a large number of reinforcements, but their presence meant that their allies in Alterac were already dealt with. So close to victory, and yet the battle was already over. Even if the Horde took Capital City, they would not be able to defend it. With little other choice, Doomhammer was forced to call for retreat, sending a dragon rider to the hinterlands to recall his forces. They would regroup in Khazmodan, where hopefully they could regain a foothold. Lothar regrouped his forces and pushed south into Khazmodan. Without their ships, the Horde would need to make their way on foot, which gave the Alliance time to organize and launch their fleet. Although the Northlands lie in ruins from the Orcs' rampage, the war had a chance of finally coming to an end. Reclaiming the keep at Tol Barad, the Alliance used the island to launch their attack against the Orcs stationed in Dun Modur. Dun Modur was positioned at the Thandol span that connected the wetlands of northern Khazmodan and the Arathi highlands of Stromgarde. The Orcs had managed up until this point to hold the Dwarven city, and had used its position to prevent any Alliance forces from crossing the bridge into Dwarven lands. The forces in Dun Modur were not prepared for the Alliance to attack from Tol Barad, however, and a swift victory was achieved. With a strong foothold, the Alliance could march south and continue to chase the retreating Horde. The Alliance would chase the Horde down into Dun Algaz, and with its liberation, they marched down towards Ironforge. When Doomhammer first launched his invasion of Khazmodan, the Bronzebeard dwarves retreated into their mountain fortress and sealed it off. The gnomes similarly hid away in Gnomeregan. Doomhammer threw everything he had against the doors of Ironforge, but they would not yield. For every dwarf that was struck down, they would drag 10 orcs down with them. Every resident took up arms, knowing this was their final stand. As time went on, Doomhammer saw the siege as a fool's errand, and they already had the resources they came to this land for. He left behind the Bleeding Hollow clan to keep the dwarves occupied as the rest of the Horde made their way north. With the Horde now heading south, hoping to fortify themselves in Blackrock Spire, the Alliance pushed out the Bleeding Hollow and ended the Orc threat in the area. Grateful for their aid, the dwarves and the gnomes would lend their aid to finish off the Orcs once and for all. Hoping to strike a major blow to the Horde, Lothar led his forces to Grim Batol. The oil refineries that once fueled the Orcs' ships would burn, further pushing them out of Khazmodan. The Dragon Maw chieftain, Zulahed, was called upon by Doomhammer to rally their dragons in Lordaeron and head to Blackrock Spire. Although Zulahed led a number of his forces south, not all of the Dragon Maw left. The Alliance remained unaware of the Horde's presence deeper within the stronghold, and left the Dragon Maw untouched in their attack. Deep in Grim Batol, Alexstrasza was still being tortured by Necros, who would take control of the remaining forces in the area. Had the Alliance been aware of the dragon's presence, they could have potentially rescued the Red Dragon aspect, and cut off the Horde's access to the dragons that torched the Kultiran fleet and burned Kul'Thalas and Lordaeron. Alas, Alexstrasza would remain a prisoner, and the Dragon Maw would continue with their work. Dragon Riders carried the news to the returning Blacktooth Grin clan of Doomhammer's retreat to Blackrock Spire, and so they diverted their course towards Stormwind, where they would travel on foot to the stronghold. Their new path would lead them by Crestfall, just off the coast of Kultiris. What was originally supposed to be just a patrol led by Lord Admiral Proudmoore led to him discovering the Orc ships, and he ordered his fleet to engage the enemy. When the dragons descended upon the Kultiran vessels, Proudmoore did not call for a retreat. With the Griffin-riding Wildhammer dwarves on their side, who had learned new tactics since Quel'Thalas, their lightning-infused hammers drove off the dragons. Without any air support, most of the remaining Orc navy was sent to the bottom of the ocean. Although the battle was a decisive victory for the Alliance, it wasn't without its casualties. Proudmoore's son, Derek, had perished during the battle, which instilled a hatred in the Lord Admiral that would last until the end of his days. Doomhammer watched the Alliance break through into the Burning Steppes and make their way to Blackrock Spire. Reinforcements would not arrive in time, so Doomhammer played his final gambit. Leading a suicidal charge with the rest of his forces, Doomhammer cut a path straight to Lothar, where the two became locked in single combat. Both warriors fought bravely, but Doomhammer crushed Lothar's skull and turned the battle in their favor. Turalyon would not let this stand and took up the mantle of leadership. Using holy magic, he used Lothar's broken blade to knock out Doomhammer and send his hordes scattering. Those captured would be locked in chains and taken back up north as prisoner. Lothar would be avenged, and a statue dedicated to him still stands outside Blackrock Mountain, where the warrior fell. All that was left to honor his memory was to forever destroy the Dark Portal. Much of the army that escaped the battle fled south, knowing their survival hinged on them escaping back to Draenor. Turalyon and his forces would take up the name the Sons of Lothar and follow the Horde into the Black Morass, where the Orcs led them straight to the Dark Portal. The Death Knights would command their forces to hold off the Alliance as they overtook them, and one of the most brutal battles of the Second War unfolded, as the Orcs held their ground to allow their brethren to retreat through the Dark Portal. It was not much, but it allowed most of the Horde to escape until the Alliance pushed back their vanguard and forced them back through the portal. They would not pursue the Horde, as the Alliance soldiers were already weary and at their limit, but they would not stand idly by as the Orcs rallied the other clans on Draenor and came charging back through. They would end this conflict once and for all. With the Alliance looking on towards the great monument to evil, Archmage Khadgar called upon his arcane magic to call down as much power as he could. The portal began to unravel as other mages joined in, and the link between the two worlds was severed. The backlash of energy from the portal closing caused the structure to explode and crumble in on itself. With its destruction, the Alliance could breathe a sigh of relief. They had won the war and crushed any hope of the Orcs returning to their world. Unbeknownst to them at the time, however, was that although the portal itself was destroyed, the rift remained. Fell magic would seep through it and continue to taint the land, bleeding out from the ruined Draenor. Not all of the Orcs made it back through the portal. The Bleeding Hollow clan arrived during the final siege of the portal, but was cut off by the Alliance. They disappeared into the jungles around the portal, biding their time. The Dragonmaw clan retreated to their fortress of Grim Batol. The Alliance had completely missed their activity deep within the stronghold, and thus it remains a haven for them. With Alexstrasza still under their control, they continued their work of breeding and breaking red dragons as weapons and mounts. The Blacktooth Grin clan sailed back to Horde lands and arrived after the portal was long destroyed. They gathered Horde survivors from the Blackrock clan and continued to Blackrock Spire once the Alliance had left the region. Many others, though, remained scattered throughout the Eastern Kingdoms. Dalrend and Main Blackhand, the leaders of the Blacktooth Grin and Blackrock clans, reclaimed Blackrock Spire as their stronghold. Orgrim Doomhammer had failed the Horde and led them to ruin, and now the siblings denounced his leadership. Learning of other clans that still remained, they contacted the Bleeding Hollow and Dragonmaw clans, intent on forming a new Horde under their own leadership, which they deemed to be the true Horde. Kilrock Deadeye of the Bleeding Hollow had no interest in their false Horde, but the Dragonmaw Orcs that had not yet retreated to Grim Batol offered their support. They would also receive allies from the nearby trolls, namely the trolls of the Smolderthorn and Firetree tribes, and the Spirestone Ogre clan. The Dark Horde would come into conflict with the Dark Iron Dwarves that lived within Blackrock Mountain, leading to the death of Maine, but Dalrend captured upper portions of their city after allying with the dragon Nefarian. Most of the remaining Orcs in Azeroth were no longer a part of any clan. They were left scattered all over the Eastern Kingdoms, surviving either alone or in small groups. the Alliance, still seeing them as a threat, opted to hunt down these fragmented groups. Groups were formed to hunt them down. The wilds were combed over from the deepest forests to the most remote of mountains. Many orcs were rounded up and placed in captivity with those captured during the Second War, but some of these hunting parties let their hatred overtake them, taking a stance to kill any orc on sight. The orcs that had been captured were taken back to Lordaeron as prisoners. There, some were taken down to the vast network of prisons, sewers, and crypts called the Undercity. Doomhammer himself would be imprisoned here, silently waiting for an opportunity to escape. The High Elves would not easily forget the Alliance's abandonment during their darkest hour. When they fled to Lordaeron, the Amani trolls would be the Elves' problem to deal with alone, which cost a heavy toll. Despite King Tyrannus pointing out how much human blood was spilled in defense of Quel'Thalas, the relations between the human kingdoms and the Elves would begin to deteriorate. The Elves would treat the other members of the Alliance with a cold disdain that only further worsened the situation. King Anasterion Sunstrider would take decisive action and claim that it was the humans' poor leadership that led to the destruction of Eversong Woods. Whatever debts he owed the humans was paid, and the majority of Elven society shut their doors to the outside world. Not all of the elves took this stance, with priests, mages, and Anasterion's own son, Gelthos, continuing to make contact with the other nations, especially the Mage Kingdom of Dalaran. Ravaged by the Horde in the First War, King Tyrannus pledged his support towards the rebuilding of Stormwind. Tyrallion would oversee much of the reconstruction by the Stonemasons Guild, led by Edwin Van Cleef. The Knights of the Silver Hand also dedicated themselves with aiding those that returned, by healing the sick and wounded, and providing whatever shelter they could to the victims of war. Not all that left Stormwind returned, finding that it was a reminder of all that was lost, but Prince Varian Wrynn would make his way back south and ascend to the throne. Varian would lead his people to reclaim their lost territories and see his kingdom prosper once again. Stormwind would be seen as a monument to the Alliance's tenacity, and while many of the northern kingdoms were plagued by the loss of homes and loved ones by the wars that had gripped the world, if a kingdom like Stormwind could rise again from the ashes, perhaps they could heal as well, given time. The issue of what to do with the Orcs was a controversial one. Trollbane of Stromgarde and Greymane of Gilneas demanded the Orcs be executed and forever rid from Azeroth, but Tyrannus vowed for mercy, as that was what separated the Alliance from the Orc savagery. The final verdict was life imprisonment, and a number of internment camps were constructed in New Stormwind to contain the Orcs, though it was not a resolution that satisfied many. Thoris Trollbane's son, Dana, was the one put in command of the internment camps, where he and his wardens maintained order. The wardens began to notice a change in the orcs after a while. They began to grow lethargic and weak. Antonidas of Dalaran began to study them, and came up with the hypothesis that without the warlocks to feed them fell magic, they were going into withdrawal. Time would pass, and the orcs' bloodlust would diminish, and security at these camps would become much more relaxed. Although the Dark Portal was destroyed, the Rift remained. Khadgar, now appointed as the Archmage, remained in the south to monitor the fell energies seeping from the portal. With a group of Magi, they would try to close the rift, but ultimately fail. Instead, they turned their efforts towards ensuring the fell magic was prevented from seeping into the rest of Azeroth and killing it as it had done to Draenor. So long as the rift existed, however, the threat of another Orc invasion was still a possibility. Khadgar's concerns were brought before the Alliance's council, where it was decided to build a fortress near the portal to monitor the fell energy seeping through the rift and keep an eye on what might come through. Netherguard Keep was constructed overlooking the Black Morass, where Khadgar would continue to study the rift. Tensions between the Seven Kingdoms would only grow in the aftermath of the Second War. Gilneas and Stromgarde would grow more frustrated over the passing of the Internment Act, and Greymane would speak out against the taxing of Gilnean people for the construction of both the camps and Netherguard Keep. The question of what to do with the traitorous Alterac was also thrown around. With Aiden Perinold imprisoned, Stromgarde argued that Alterac should be annexed into its own territory to cover their losses during the war. Meanwhile, Gilneas suggested putting Perinold's nephew, Isidin, in command, as he had fled to Gilneas for refuge. A stranger by the name of Lord Davil Prester, an Alterac noble, would throw his hat into the ring, yet King Tyrannus wanted to turn the nation over to Perinold's son, Paladin. Prester would convince Tyrannus to hand him control of Alterac, but would disappear following the reopening of the Dark Portal. With Perinold dying while in prison, Lordaeron ultimately settled on simply annexing the nation into its own lands. When the Orcs first crossed through the Dark Portal, not all of the clans were brought through. Many remained behind to safeguard their homeworld, such as the Shadow Moon, Warsong, Thunderlord, and Shattered Hand clans, among others. Guarding the Dark Portal from the Draenor side was seen as rather boring, with most Orcs just passing the time by playing dice. When the horde that passed into Azeroth retreated through it at the end of the Second War, it only added to the numbers of those now stuck on Draenor. With the portal destroyed, life was bleak for those trapped. Draenor was dying, and the fell magic that permeated the land from the Orcs' rampant use of demonic energy had left the planet tainted. All life there was on the verge of extinction. It seemed as though there was nothing that could be done of their bleak situation, were it not for one Orc that remained hopeful of what was to come. Tarangor was once a member of the Shadowmoon clan that joined Gul'dan's Shadow Council. He was the first of the Shadowmoon shamans that became a warlock and was instrumental in the construction of the Dark Portal. However, when Doomhammer took control of the Horde, Tarangor was slain. Death would not claim him, however, as Tarangor became the first to be transformed into a Death Knight. Taking the name of Terran Gorfiend, he followed Doomhammer all the way to Lordaeron. However, when the Horde fell, he led his Death Knights back through the Dark Portal. There, he met with Gul'dan's former mentor, Ner'zhul, the leader of the Shadowmoon clan. Ner'zhul wished to open gateways to other worlds and escape the dying Draenor, and Gorfiend decided to conquer a world of his own. Though they did not have what they needed to achieve this, powerful artifacts on Azeroth could potentially stabilize a number of portals. Another invasion of Azeroth would be difficult on their own, and so it was decided to unite the remaining clans on Draenor to seek out the 3 artifacts they needed from human lands.
The Orcish hordes lay vanquished as the triumphant armies of the Alliance stood vigil over the evil gateway that had brought the Orcs into Azeroth. Calling upon the arcane powers of the Archwizard Khadgar, the fury of the earth and skies were unleashed upon the Dark Portal to destroy it once and for all. Blinding light dimmed, an eerie glow fell across the black morass. For though the portal was destroyed, the rift that joined these worlds at war yet remained.
With Warcraft 2 being such a success, an expansion would be released only months later. Although the Second War had come to a close, the Orcs would not sit idly by on Draenor, and would launch an attack against Azeroth once more, with the Alliance venturing into the Rift in an event called the Invasion of Draenor. Not only did the expansion provide 24 new missions split among 2 campaigns, but it also introduced a lot more characters that would further shape the Alliance and Horde, such as Illyria Windrunner, Grommash Hellscream, and the Black Dragon Death Knight. Thankfully, the chronological order of missions is much easier to follow, with the majority of the Orc campaign happening prior to the events of the Human campaign. 8 years after the Dark Portal was first opened, and 2 years after the portal was destroyed, Ner'zhul would put a new plan into action. Before the invasion of Azeroth could begin again, Ner'zhul would need to gather all of the pieces. Most importantly, he would need the knowledge of the former Shadow Council on how to construct the portal again. The Death Knights that hold this information are currently under the control of an ogre necromancer named Mogor, who plans to use them to create a powerful spell. Mogor's Laughing Skull clan would need to be taken care of, and so Ner'zhul dispatched a small force of his Shadowmoon to subjugate the Death Knights for his own horde. Yet, to make this work, he would need other clans to join him. The first to accept his offer was Grommash Hellscream of the Warsong clan. Grom and his Warsong were the first to drink the demon's blood, but had been left out of the invasion of Azeroth, and now they were excited at the chance to fight something again, regardless of who it was that they were fighting. After freeing Grom and a number of Warsong held prisoner by the Laughing Skull, their small force marches into their camp and kills Mogor, with Oberus being put in command of the clan and forced to join the new horde. The Bone Chewer captain named Harkin Skullsplinter has come into the possession of Gul'dan's skull. Ever since the Warlock's death, the skull made it back to Draenor and has been passed around as a trophy. However, Ner'zhul needs the skull to open the rift, and so it must be claimed.
Sending the ogre Dentarg to meet with Kargath Bladefist of the Shattered Hand clan, the two of them worked together to convince Fenris Wolfbrother of the Thunderlord clan to join their army. Fenris would agree to the offer, as battle-starved as Grom and Kargath are, and they helped to break into the Bone Chewer camp. The Bone Chewers would be broken, similar to the Laughing Skull, and Grom would claim the skull off Harkon's corpse. He would then appoint Tagar Spinebreaker to lead the Bone Chewers, so that they would also be brought into Ner'zhul's horde. With an army at his disposal and a way to open the rift, Ner'zhul and Gorfind were ready to begin their plan. Ner'zhul had promised the clans he brought into his fold that they would have a chance to escape the dying Draenor and conquer a new, unsuspecting world for themselves. Yet there were those that still clung to the past. The Thunderlord and Bone Chewer clans wished to return to Azeroth once more. Hearing the tales of the Alliance from the refugees that made it back through the portal, they wished to test their mettle against the humans. They would succeed where Doomhammer had failed, and Azeroth would fall. This plan was in direct opposition to Ner'zhul's plans, which put them at odds. The Thunderlords and Bone Chewers would be put back in their place by the rest of the Horde. Azeroth was a lost cause, and why focus on one world when countless others were theirs for the taking? Once the rebellious clans had fallen back into line, Ner'zhul used the Skull of Gul'dan to open the rift, just enough to send through a small army and Gorfind's strike force. Khadgar could sense magic welling up from the rift, and believed a new invasion was imminent. Illyria Windrunner, a high elf that assisted Turalyon during the Second War, made her way towards New Stormwind to ask for aid. At the start of the Second War, Illyria would lead her rangers to help the Alliance, seeing the Orcs as a threat, and traveled with Turalyon as they chased Doomhammer into the hinterlands. When Quel'Thalas was attacked, she reunited with her sister Sylvanas to fend off the Trolls, but when their younger brother Lyrith died in the battle, she sought Turalyon's comfort. She would meet with Turalyon, who would rally his forces in southern Stormwind, and with Daneth Trollbane, who was a veteran of the Second War, and entrusted with overseeing the Orc internment camps. Although the Alliance was still weary from the Second War, they were not willing to risk standing by while the Orcs invaded again. The Orcs would not gain another foothold on this world, and Nethergard Keep would gain the full support of the Alliance. As their forces marched into the Blasted Lands, they would realize that they were too late to prevent the events that were about to transpire. With the Skull of Gul'dan and the help of the Death Knights, the rift is opened once more. Grom led the first to charge in, breaking through the Alliance forces guarding the area. As the clans pushed their way back into Azeroth, along with Gorfind and his Death Knights, a new frame was constructed around the rift. The Dark Portal would stand once more. Many of them would hold the ground around the Dark Portal to ensure it would not be destroyed again, but Grom would lead the Warsong clan in attacking the large citadel overlooking the portal. Claiming Nethergard Keep for themselves was not their primary objective, however, and instead they would serve as a distraction. With the Alliance's eyes focused on Nethergard Keep, Gorfind would lead his Death Knights and a group of Orcs, including the Thunderlord clan, north. Their job would be to hunt down and steal the necessary artifacts while Grom served as a distraction. Gorfind would slip out from under the Alliance's watch, and make their way to Blackrock Spire to enlist the help of the Blackrock clan. The Orcs exploded out from the portal and began to lay siege to Nethergard Keep. Turalyon's forces, along with the Keep's defenders under the command of Khadgar, have held out under their onslaught, but without reinforcements they would soon fall. Daneth organized a great number of troops from New Stormwind and rode to Nethergard, yet they would not have an easy time of reaching Turalyon, as Grom's forces surrounded the citadel. He would need to break through their force and force them back in order to reinforce the Keep's defenses. By the time Daneth had arrived, more of the clans had already come through. The Bone Chewers, Laughing Skull, and Shattered Hand had already made their way into the Blasted Lands, and Daneth's meager force could not stand against their ever-growing numbers. He would be the only one to reach Nethergard, and despite the defeat, he believed that he could contain the Orcs in the Blasted Lands until the rest of the Alliance forces could arrive. Surprisingly, he was right, as the Orcs would not breach Nethergard or move further north into the Swamp of Sorrows. The Blackrock clan would prove no help to Gorfind, as they would turn away his offer to join them. They would remain hidden away in Blackrock Spire and proclaim themselves the true heirs of Blackhand's horde. The Bleeding Hollow, on the other hand, would offer their assistance. When the portal was destroyed, Kilrog led his clan into the surrounding jungles, where they had managed to escape from capture by the Alliance. The information they gave about Azeroth after the Second War would prove invaluable to Gorfind, and he allowed them to return through the portal to rest. It had been a long 2 years hiding in the jungles. The Dragon Maw would also not be of any assistance, but an unexpected stranger came to meet with Gorfiend. Traveling far from the Northlands, the dragon Deathwing would approach Gorfiend and offer the services of his black dragons. He watched the Orcs throughout the Second War and sought to make a deal. In exchange for his aid, Deathwing wanted the Orcs to transport precious cargo back to Draenor. Gorfiend would agree to the deal, and Deathwing would inform him of where 2 of the artifacts were. Up until now, Gorfiend knew only the location of the Book of Medivh, which would be their first target. The mad guardian Medivh was slain during the First War, but the magical knowledge he procured before his death was invaluable. His last surviving spellbook had been retrieved and brought to the library in Stormwind Keep for safeguarding. Sensing the presence of the book in Stormwind, Gorfiend and Deathwing descended upon the city. Dragons and Death Knights tore open the city as they forced their way into the castle, and as Gorfiend approached the library, he found that he was already too late. The guards to the library were already dead, with a strange blade shoved into one's neck. The book was snatched out of his grasp before he could claim it, but forces from the Bleeding Hollow pointed out that the blade in question was one of Alteraci design, and the spellbook was likely on its way north. From here, Gorfiend would split his forces into 3 groups, tasking each one with finding one of the artifacts they needed. He would lead his forces towards Alterac to chase after Medivh's book. The dragons would not be able to carry one of the groups all the way to their destination, and so they would steal a number of ships from Menethil Harbor to carry them. The Death Knight Ragnarok Bloodreaver was assigned to follow Fenris and Tagar to the tomb of Sargeras, and retrieve the Scepter of Sargeras. The journey to the Broken Isles would be a long and arduous one, made all the more difficult by the Alliance's great navy. Kultiras had been a thorn in the side of the Horde throughout the Second War due to their vast fleets of ships at their disposal. No doubt they would hunt down the Orc ships. The Horde would quickly assemble a navy and head out with the Black Dragons to assault Kultiras and prevent them from following afterwards. As they got to work, they did not realize that they were being watched. After escaping in the hinterlands, Garona made her way south and reunited with Khadgar, where they worked to free her mind from the Shadow Council's magic. She would follow Gorfiend's party and return to Khadgar with news of what they were planning. While she wished to help Khadgar further, she turned her attention to hunting down the last of the Shadow Council on Azeroth, catching the trail of Cho'Gall and sailing into the west. Lord Admiral Proudmoore's fleet would no longer trouble the Horde, as they launched a surprise attack against Kultiras. Black dragons rained down fire from above as the Horde sent the human ships to the bottom of the harbor. Kultiras would not find any aid from the Alliance, as though they had stuck with King Tyrannus' side through the political turmoil following the Second War. The Alliance was being assaulted from all sides. With the Kultiran fleet destroyed, the Horde would have free reign over the Great Sea, and Fenris would sail west towards the Broken Isles. Gorfiend and Deathwing would continue heading north to Alterac and claim the Book of Medivh. Proudmoore would take this information to the Alliance, informing them that the Horde forces were mobilized all over the Eastern Kingdoms, seeking out powerful artifacts. Unfortunately, by the time the Alliance had turned their attention to the problem, Gorfiend would already have his prizes. The old, crumbling encampments of the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer were anything but silent. The ghosts of the fallen clans wailed their agony and continued to walk the earth, forever playing out their final battle. When Fenris and his group arrived on the island, they would be attacked by the restless spirits and the demons that walked the land. They would need to fight their way into the tomb to find the artifact, though the efforts would be well worth it. The Scepter of Sargeras had the ability to tear open rifts in reality just for a moment, which would be crucial to Ner'zhul's plan. Fenris would suffer heavy losses, however, as the scepter would be deep within the tomb. The demons and ghosts would tear into his army all the way there, and they would continue to be hounded by them as they retreated back to their ships. Far too many had been lost to claim the scepter, but Fenris sailed back to the Dark Portal to regroup with Gorfiend once his mission was finished. The scepter would be entrusted to the Bleeding Hollow until the moment of victory had come. During the time the Alliance was still arguing about what to do with Alterac, Deathwing and Gorfiend arrived to search for the Book of Medivh. Deathwing, under the guise of Lord Davil Prester, had been trying to convince the Alliance to give him control of Alterac, and drove Aiden Paranold mad so that he could not contradict the disguised dragon. Paranold offered the Book of Medivh to Gorfiend in exchange for destroying the Alliance forces within Alterac, raving and demanding that Lordaeron be removed from his lands. Gorfiend decided to humor Paranold, and sent Deathwing to burn down the outpost stations in Alterac. Such chaos would only further strain the Alliance and divide their attention. The book would be Gorfiend's to claim, and the spells therein would aid in the ritual of opening more portals. With his business in Alterac handled, Gorfiend turned his eyes to the kingdom of Dalaran to group up with his forces there, and would leave Paranold to his fate.
Only one artifact remains to be collected in the hands of the Kirin Tor. They had created a tool known as the Eye of Dalaran to focus their magical energies in an attempt to rebuild the city of Dalaran following the Second War. Now, Ner'zhul needed it in order to focus the energies needed to open the portals. Dalaran's defenses had been rebuilt since the war, and the orcs sent ahead could not break through. Thus, Gorfin saw to it that the shoreline was broken through and carved his way into the city. The mages were formidable opponents, and several of Gorfin's Death Knights fell at the hands of Antonidas, Kael'thas, and Crassus. Yet they were unable to kill or capture Gorfin, and the Death Knight was able to break into the arcane vault located in the Violet Citadel. With the Eye of Dalaran in his possession, Gorfin called for Deathwing, who flew in to collect the remaining forces in Dalaran. With all of the artifacts collected, Gorfin and Deathwing flew south towards the Dark Portal to head back to Draenor. The Alliance had dug in their heels at the Blasted Lands, and the Warsong and Shattered Hand clans were struggling to fight them off. Hellscream still held the charge against Nethergard, and it gave Gorfin an opening through the area. His forces would break through the human station in the area, away from Nethergard Keep, where their defenses were not as strong, and made his way to the portal. Deathwing and his Black Dragons brought in wagons with their cargo to take with them. The carts were magically covered and sealed, preventing any mortal eyes from peering in at what lay within. Gorfin cared little about what was actually in the carts, and allowed them to be taken through the portal into Draenor. There, Deathwing hoped to use the Black Dragon eggs inside to rebuild his broken flight. On the other side, Gorfin would move to Hellfire Citadel to meet with Ner'zhul and deliver the artifacts. Leaving the Warsong and Shattered Hand to deal with the humans, they did not expect that they would be followed. Having pieced together Ner'zhul's plan, Khadgar and Turalyon agreed the Horde could not be allowed to open more portals. Azeroth had suffered enough, and if they had the chance to prevent what happened to them from happening to other worlds, then they would take it. Turalyon rallied the Sons of Lothar, and several Second War veterans including Illyria, Daneth, and the dwarf Kurdran Wildhammer. They would follow Gorfin through the portal and take the fight to Draenor. Grom still held strong against the Alliance forces, but with the added pressure of their march forward, Turalyon punched through the Orcs and made their way to the Dark Portal. The Warsong clan was driven off in all directions, and Kargath led some of his Shattered Hand back through the portal to Draenor, where they would retreat to Hellfire Citadel. The Dark Portal would exchange hands over the course of the conflict, with Grom's forces stationed in the nearby hills, and striking out in an attempt to take the portal from the forces at Nethergard. For the first time since the Orcs first built the portal, the Alliance set foot on the alien soil of Draenor. The barren and red wasteland surrounding the Alliance expedition was all that remained of the Tanaan jungle. The first thing they would need to do was establish their foothold in the new world, and they would begin to fortify around the Dark Portal. The site had been chosen by Ner'zhul to conduct his ritual, as it was built upon the convergence of many powerful ley lines, but with it in the Alliance hands, he would need to find somewhere else, and began to head to the southeast Shadowmoon Valley. The Alliance, not knowing this, would launch an attack against Hellfire Citadel in an effort to stop Ner'zhul. They would instead encounter Kargath. Dentarg would be slain by Khadgar, and Kargath was forced to retreat as the Alliance overwhelmed him from both land and sky. Before Dentarg's death, Khadgar was able to learn about the artifacts that had been stolen. He theorized that if they were able to reclaim these relics, they would be able to reseal the portal and undo the damage Medivh had done all those years ago. With their presence firmly established in Hellfire Peninsula, the Alliance would need a fleet to drive off the remaining clans in the area and secure the peninsula for the Alliance. The nearby port of Zeth-Kur would be their target, where the Horde's shipyard served as a way to transport their troops around Draenor. Although initially the Orcs were taken by surprise by the Alliance's incursion, they would quickly recover, and their fury would drive them to try and wipe out the humans. Draenor was their world, and nobody was going to take it from them. Khadgar would also sense a strong presence to the north. Once Deathwing had crossed over into Draenor, he left a few token dragons with the Horde, before taking his eggs and heading to the northern crags of Gorgrond, taking the Skull of Gul'dan as a prize. Their forces could not simply deal with Ner'zhul alone, so Khadgar left Daneth to follow the Warchief's trail, while he would retrieve the Skull of Gul'dan to seal the portal on Draenor's side. Kurdran Wildhammer would scout out the Orcs' march south and find them heading towards Shadowmoon Valley. His Griffin Riders would rain down lightning on them, forcing Ner'zhul to the ancient crypt network known as Auchindoun. The Bleeding Hollow had made it into their stronghold and offered to hold off the Alliance while Ner'zhul escaped.
Danath Trollbane's ground forces followed shortly behind, and he would lead his forces against the Bleeding Hollow, thinking Ner'zhul had trapped himself in the structure. Although the humans had superior numbers, the cramped passageways would offer little space for fighting, and the Orcs knew the land better than Danath did. Still, Danath pushed into Auchindoun, laying waste to the Bleeding Hollow clan within. He was disappointed to see that Ner'zhul had already slipped through his grasp, and that they were not able to follow him through the maze-like catacombs. Kilrogg Deadeye, however, would not let him pass. Chieftains of the Bleeding Hollow hold a tradition of sacrificing an eye to see a vision of their own death. Within the crypt, Kilrogg would face Danath in a fierce battle, a smile plastered on his face as Danath slid his blade through his throat. High atop his perch in Gorgrond, Deathwing planned to see his dragonflight reborn. Driven mad by the whispers beneath the earth on Azeroth, he had betrayed the other dragonflights, and now the black dragons lay shattered. His presence would anger a great Grond by the name of Gruul. Khadgar, Illyria, and Turalyon would make a deal with Gruul to lure the dragon out of hiding so that Gruul could deal with him. Once they found a hatchery full of black dragon eggs that was left unguarded, they began to smash them and draw Deathwing out of hiding. Their plan would work as the Earth Warder would fly down in a rage. Gruul was not standing idly by, instead catching any black dragons and skewering them on the sharpened spines of the mountains. When Deathwing emerged, the two engaged in a great battle that nearly killed the black dragon aspect. At the last minute, Deathwing would turn tail and head back south, fleeing through the portal back to Azeroth. Gruul became the undisputed master of Gorgrond, adopting the name the Dragon Killer for his deeds, while Khadgar collected Gul'dan's skull from Deathwing's lair and heading back south to regroup with Danath and Kurdran. While the Alliance had been chasing the artifacts on Draenor, the Horde had time to reorganize themselves. Now, they were pushing back against the Alliance, and if Khadgar did not close the portal soon, they would be overwhelmed, and the Orcs would be free to invade Azeroth once more, or any other world they saw fit to claim. Khadgar, Illyria, and Turalyon would meet back up with Danath and Kurdran along the coast of Shadowmoon Valley. The Orcish Armada had established a number of strongholds along the coastline, hoping to slow down their military power and to buy their other forces some more time. The Alliance expedition moves from stronghold to stronghold, razing it to the ground and making their way towards the Black Temple. An old Draenei temple of worship, the Temple of Karabor, was claimed by the Orcs when they had first drank the blood of Manaroth, and Gul'dan twisted it into the Black Temple. With the Alliance laying claim to the Dark Portal, the Black Temple would be the next best place for Ner'zhul to conduct his ritual. As the Alliance pushed through the Orcish horde, they would stand outside of the gates to the Black Temple and gather their strength for the final assault. The time had come to stop Ner'zhul, and the Alliance was ready to finish the conflict. They would charge into the Black Temple and fight their way up to its summit. At the same time, Ner'zhul would begin the ritual. Karen Gorefiend and his Death Knights would meet the Alliance in combat, hoping to hold them off until Ner'zhul was finished. While they held strong for the most part, Gorefiend and Turalyon would face each other down. Gorefiend would fall to Turalyon's blade, and his Death Knights would scatter from the temple. The remaining Shadowmoon Orcs that were defending the temple would similarly fall before the Alliance, and they would be cleared to the summit. Khadgar pressed on, intent on stopping Ner'zhul and destroying his mystic sanctum. The Book of Medivh would be the last artifact Khadgar needed in order to seal the portal, but he would not find it once he reached the summit of the temple. Instead, he would be greeted with the ramifications of Ner'zhul's spell gone awry. With victory at hand, Ner'zhul abandoned any honor or altruism he held in his heart. Numerous portals opened all around him, and those loyal to him would follow Ner'zhul through the largest of the portals to be opened. They would abandon the Horde to their fate on Draenor. Yet Ner'zhul could not have predicted the consequences of his actions. The spell destabilized the ley lines running beneath the Black Temple, which unleashed a devastating chain reaction that began to unravel all of the powerful magical energies on Draenor. The portals would begin to drag Draenor into the hellish domain of the twisting Nether as the planet began to tear itself apart. The lands split apart and the seas would boil away as unimaginable forces tore at the fabric of reality. Atop the Black Temple, Khadgar would recover the Eye of Dalaran, but the Scepter of Sargeras was brought by Ner'zhul through the portal, and the Book of Medivh was missing. If action was not taken to remedy the situation, the volatile energies would erupt through the portal, and Azeroth would collapse in the same way Draenor was currently undergoing. Once Draenor began to unravel, all hell broke loose. As Khadgar was searching the Black Temple for the Book of Medivh, word came from Hellfire Peninsula. Although they were ill-equipped, a massive Orc force had broken through the Alliance fortifications at Hellfire Citadel and were making their way to the Dark Portal. The forces defending the portal were holding them off, but would not hold for long. The forces at the Black Temple would swiftly return to Hellfire Peninsula to reinforce those defending the portal. If the Orcs took control of the portal, there would be no hope of closing it before Draenor was blown apart, and so they could only hope that they could withstand the onslaught long enough for the book to be located.
Fel-infused storms raged across the battlefield as Orcs fought hard to escape through the portal, with the Alliance struggling to hold them back. Hope was beginning to run out as no sign of Medivh's tome could be found, until Khadgar was approached by the Laughing Skull chieftain, Oberys. At the beginning of Ner'zhul's scheming, he had subjugated the Laughing Skull clan and turned Oberys into his unwilling pawn. But with Ner'zhul gone, Oberys was loyal to nobody except for his own clan, and he desired revenge. He had stolen the Book of Medivh at the Black Temple and now offered it to Khadgar in exchange for a favor from the Alliance. The volatile energies of the Twisting Nether had transformed Gorgrond and Frostfire Ridge into the Blade's Edge Mountains, where the remaining Thunderlord clan had laid their claim. Though Oberys was mortally wounded by Ner'zhul when he protested that he was abandoning the Horde, he still wished for his people to gain dominion over all others in the northern lands, and asked the Alliance to escort the Laughing Skull north and destroy the Thunderlords in the area. With little other choice, a detachment was sent from the Dark Portal, as many as could be spared, to fight against the Thunderlord clan. They would not stand alone, as the traitorous Laughing Skull would join them in battle. Oberys, with his last dying breath, turned over the Book of Medivh, grateful that his final act was to spit on Ner'zhul and his abandoned horde. The Dark Portal would need to be closed from both sides of the rift, and so Khadgar, Turalyon, and the other members of the Alliance expedition made the decision to stay behind and close the portal on the Draenor side. Though it would cost them their lives and the lives of their companions, all would fight for the safety of Azeroth. With the combined powers of the Skull of Gul'dan and the Book of Medivh, Khadgar offered to be the one to close it. The path to the Dark Portal from the Blade's Edge Mountains was treacherous, as the Orc Horde was still trying to push their way through into Azeroth. Dimensional rifts tore open across the skies and fire burst forth from the earth as they made haste towards the portal. Draenor was heaving its final death throes as the hour of its destruction was upon those still on the planet. Upon reaching the portal, Khadgar began to work his spell. Although the abandoned Orc clans fought desperately to escape, Turalyon and his forces would keep them at bay just long enough for Khadgar to finish the spell. Khadgar would pour the magic of the artifacts into the portal, causing the rift to untangle itself and close off, severing the two worlds once more. As it was closing, a griffin rider would fly through the portal with the three artifacts. Only the Skull of Gul'dan and the Book of Medivh would make it through to the other side, with the Eye of Dalaran being lost somewhere through the traversal of the collapsing portal. Once the gravity of their situation hit them, Khadgar led the Alliance survivors through a nearby rift to safety. They did not know where it would take them, but anywhere else was better than staying on Draenor. Many would be lost through the rift, including Turalyon and Illyria. They would be presumed dead, leaving behind their son on Azeroth. Unable to withstand the magical energies any further, Draenor would explode in a cataclysmic event. Some of the planet would survive the explosion, though its remnants would be hurled throughout the Twisting Nether. The great planet of Draenor, once home to the Orcs, the Ogres, and a whole host of other great races, was no more. A large fragment of Draenor would drift through the Twisting Nether, though it would be left unrecognizable. This fragment would become known as Outland, with Hellfire Peninsula would remain, along with the Blade's Edge Mountains to the north and Shadowmoon Valley to the southeast. The island of Farallon that lay on the northeast coast would crash into the mountain range, becoming the region of Netherstorm. The Zangar Sea, born from the corpse of the great spore mount Zang in a time long lost, would drain of its water and become the Zangar Marsh, and would be the only remaining source of water to the inhabitants of Outland. Similarly, the forests of Talador would remain intact, although twisted and mutated. It would be called the Terakar Forest. The verdant plains of Nagrand were surprisingly left intact by the explosion. Having been spared from the fel-fueled decay of the rest of Draenor, it was a home to many refugees from both the initial Horde invasions and from the destruction of the planet. Others were not so lucky, as Ashran, the spires of Iraq, and the ogre capital of Hymal would all be lost to the surrounding void. Although much of their numbers were lost, Khadgar led the Alliance survivors back through the rift into Outland. They found a broken world cut off from their home. The Sons of Lothar would remain in Outland and dedicate themselves to fighting the demons that were looking to claim the area, as they poured in from their nearby strongholds within the Twisting Nether. They would maintain a number of fortresses across Outland, such as Honor Hold, just outside of Hellfire Citadel, Illyrian Stronghold in Terakar Forest, and Wildhammer Stronghold in Shadowmoon Valley. They would find the help of the world's natives, such as the Broken. Once Draenei, the fell energies of the planet had transformed them over time until they were left unrecognizable. The energies of the Twisting Nether would also have an effect on the black dragon eggs that were stored in the Blade's Edge Mountains. The bodies of the dragons inside would mutate and transform into energetic beings. They would become the Netherwing Flight, and would hold no allegiance to Deathwing, instead seeking to establish their home in the chaotic and dangerous world of Outland. On Azeroth, only a few survivors made it back through the portal. Both Orc and human made their way back, where the Orcs would immediately surrender to the Alliance forces. Those of the Alliance expedition that made their way back told those on Azeroth of what had happened on Draenor and the noble sacrifice that had been made there. Statues of 5 of the great champions that led the expedition would be built in Stormwind to honor their memories: Khadgar, Turalyon, Illyria, Kurdran, and Danath. All were presumed to be either dead from the planet's explosion or were lost somewhere within the twisting nether. Regardless, little hope remained of ever seeing those that stepped through the portal again. Eretor would grow up in the care of his aunt and uncle, Varisa Windrunner and Ronan. Though Varisa and Sylvanas would grieve the loss of another one of their siblings, life would continue for them. Eretor would grow up to be a paladin, just as his father was before him. The Book of Medivh and the Skull of Gul'dan were recovered from the wreckage of the Dark Portal and would be brought to Dalaran for safekeeping. Ner'zhul and his loyal followers would pass through the largest rift that opened once they completed the spell. On the other side, they would be apprehended by the demon lord Kil'jaeden. The Orcs would be handed over to the hands of the Dreadlords and horrifically tortured until Ner'zhul's sanity wore away and he agreed to serve Kil'jaeden. Ner'zhul and his followers would have their flesh stripped from their bones and their bodies would unravel until only a spectral entity remained. The Dreadlords would bind these spectral entities to special jars called phylacteries, from which they would project a physical form from and be reborn as liches. These immortal sorcerers were gifted with powers of frost and shadow. Ner'zhul himself would suffer a much worse fate. His soul was ripped from his body and attached to a suit of armor, which would be encased in a block of solid ice. Azeroth had proven particularly difficult for the Burning Legion to conquer in the past, and so Kil'jaeden put the Dreadlord Tychondrius in command of bringing it to its knees. The undead liches and their new Lich King would prove to be a valuable tool in their new invasion. When the portal to Draenor closed, Grom and his Warsong clan were left stranded on Azeroth. They would receive word of the planet's destruction and seek to find a new home. For 15 years they would evade the Alliance forces in the area and hide within the wilderness. Over this time, Grom began to understand what the Warlocks had done to his people. A weariness would tug at his bones and threaten to swallow him whole, but Grom's will was stronger than the fell withdrawal, and he would lead his people with the same iron will to prevent them from falling to the same fate as those in the internment camps. It would be a struggle he would hold until the end of his days. Doomhammer, within his prison at the Undercity, would find a chance to break free of his chains and would flee into the wilds. He would sneak into one of the internment camps, expecting to find warriors, but only found listless and lethargic prisoners. Despair overcame him, and Doomhammer would almost give in to the same malaise, but instead would retreat into the wilds once more. Finding a secluded and hidden area of Lordaeron, he would live as a hermit in shame. The alliance of Lordaeron was buckling under the weight of its actions. The treasuries of its nations were bled dry through the construction of Orc camps, Netherguard Keep, and New Stormwind. Arguments over Alterac further drove a wedge between Gilneas and Stromgarde and King Tyrannus. The final nail in the coffin were reports of Orcs breaking free from their camps. While they had been a non-threat for over a decade, a group of Orcs had risen up and began to liberate those that were imprisoned. A new horde seemed to be on the rise, prompting Greymane to once again point out that they never should have been left alive. Gilneas would withdraw from the Alliance, constructing a massive wall around their lands and sealing themselves off from the outside world. In Dalaran, the Archmage Kel'Thuzad would be exiled from the city and would be stripped of his rank on their Council of Six, once Antonidas discovered his experiments in dark, necromantic magic. Kel'Thuzad would leave Dalaran in disgrace, but hearing whispers in his head, he would sail to the frozen roof of the world in search of answers. Alexstrasza became an important asset of the Dragonmaw following the Second War, as she was their only remaining weapon against the Alliance. Deathwing, however, saw little use for her to live. Having betrayed the other flights long ago, it was he who showed Nekros how to use the Demon Soul to bind Alexstrasza. But with the destruction of his eggs on Draenor, he planned to use the Red Dragon eggs to rebuild his flight. He convinced the Dragonmaw to move Alexstrasza to Dun Algaz, hoping to lure her into the open, but his plans were interrupted by Coriolstraz and his Red Dragons, along with the help from the Alliance, led by Ronan. The battle was a bloody conflict as the Dragonmaw attempted to hold off the Red Dragons, and Nekros would attempt to use the Demon Soul to bind Deathwing and gain the upper hand. Unbeknownst to him, the Black Dragonflight were immune to the power of the Demon Soul, and Deathwing escaped the conflict. Nekros would be killed by Alexstrasza and swallowed whole. Breaking free of her chains, Alexstrasza laid waste to the remaining Dragonmaw clan, and Ronan used a scale of Deathwing to scar the Demon Soul, forever destroying it. Deathwing's plan had failed, and the other dragon aspects had come out of hiding to end his madness. Deathwing had once convinced the other dragons to pour their powers into a magical artifact called the Dragon Soul to fend off the last demonic invasion of Azeroth, but he did not put in his own power, revealing the Dragon Soul's actual purpose of subjugating the other dragons. Ysera of the Green Dragonflight, Nosdormu of the Bronze Dragonflight, and Malagos of the Blue Dragonflight would travel to Grim Batol and strike at Deathwing. Although still weakened from his battle with Gruul, he overpowered the three aspects. The fight turned against him, however, once Ronan destroyed the Demon Soul. The power of the dragon aspects was restored to them, and with Alexstrasza now free, the four of them hunted down Deathwing. Deathwing managed to evade the dragon aspects and escape to the elemental plane of Deepholm. He had retreated here once before after he failed to kill the other dragons at the construction of the Dragon Soul, and so his presence did not disturb the elementals there for the time being. King Taranis Menethil would have two children, the youngest of whom would be named Arthas. Arthas would be brought up to be a kind and disciplined man, trained in combat by the Ironforge ambassador Muradin Bronzebeard, and in the ways of the light by the paladin Uther the Lightbringer. Both were veterans of the Second War that Taranis held in high regards. Though Arthas was headstrong and stubborn, he became one of the youngest members to be inducted into the Silver Hand at the age of 19, and distinguished himself as a brave hero unafraid of the most dangerous of missions. He would soon court Jaina Proudmoore, daughter of Lord Admiral Dalen, as the two had known each other since they were children when Jaina left Kultiris to study with the Kirin Tor. She would become the apprentice to Antonidas himself, and the two young lovers would spark whispers and rumors in the royal courts, ultimately leading to their breakup. Still, their love for each other would not wane over the years, even as they pursued their own ambitions. Adelis Blackmore would be put in command of the internment camps in Lordaeron. He had been a clever strategist like his father, and saw the task as a punishment for his father's betrayal of the Alliance, but he would have a secret weapon in his corner. Years ago, he would find an infant orc washed up on the river. Despite his better judgment, he decided not to kill the orc, but instead to raise it as his own, and named the child Thrall. Thrall would be trained as a gladiator, and once he proved himself to be more than a simple dumb orc, Blackmore trained him in strategy, philosophy, and leadership. The orcs under his watch had once been great warriors, and Blackmore hoped to use Thrall to lead the orcs to overthrow the Alliance, putting himself on top. Blackmore would rebuild the Alliance in his own image, but his cruelty and drinking would cause Thrall to see him as a monster. With the help of his friend, Taretha Foxton, Thrall would escape from Durnhold Keep. In the wilds, Thrall would meet with Grom, who would point him in the direction of Alterac, where the remaining Frostwolf clan made their home. There, he would meet with their shaman, Drekthar, and learn of who he truly was. He learned of his mother and father and what they had died for. He learned of the great clans of Draenor and the corruption that befell them. Thrall was born an orc, but he did not belong with them. He did not know of their culture or their beliefs. He would learn shamanism through Drekthar, but his most important teacher was a hermit in the woods. Knowing that Thrall was alive dug up painful memories for Doomhammer, but teaching him what it meant to live and fight as an orc brought peace to the old warrior's soul. Thrall would become Doomhammer's second in command, and the two of them would rejoin with Grom. Together, they would work to free other orcs from the internment camps, their spirit of freedom helping to lift the lethargy that had gripped them and driving them to fight back against their jailers. During one of their raids against one of the camps, Doomhammer would fall in battle. With his last breath, he would make Thrall his successor and the new war chief of the Horde. Thrall would inherit Doomhammer's legendary weapon, along with his armor and responsibilities. Hoping to end the internment camps in one fell swoop, Thrall marched back to Durnhold Keep to meet with Blackmore. He asked to parley peacefully with Blackmore, not wanting to resort to violence. In response, Blackmore would sever the head of Taretha and throw it over the walls at Thrall. Taretha had thought of Thrall as a younger brother, and been one of the few to show him kindness, and this was her repayment for helping him escape. Enraged, Thrall stormed the keep, and the Horde would free all of those trapped within. Blackmore would retreat deeper into the camp, where he would be confronted and killed by Thrall. With Blackmore dead and the administration of the camps crumbling, Thrall would have an easy time liberating the smaller camps, and seek a new home for his people on Azeroth. The world was in as terrible a state as it had ever been. The Alliance had fallen apart, save for a few that refused to let it die. The Orcs had broken free of their chains, and their intentions were far from known. A pestilence began to seep into the Eastweald, and villages began to die off. Lady Prester, daughter of Davil Prester, became a high-ranking noble in Stormwind's court. She would tear them apart from within, convincing the other nobles not to pay the Stonemasons Guild for their work rebuilding the city.
Riots broke out, resulting in the death of Queen Tiffin Rin and nearly causing the death of her son, Anduin Rin. Meanwhile, in the north, Kel'Thuzad worked in secret to grow a cult in service to the Lich King. He would make a deal with the Barov family at Kardaro to turn their estate into a school for both training new necromancers and performing his own research. All the while, a great spirit watched the world as the shadow loomed overhead. A great prophet that knew the invasion of the Legion was imminent set out to encourage others on their journey so that perhaps Azeroth might be saved.
We never paid any heed to the ancient prophecies. Like fools, we clung to the old hatreds. And fought as we had for generations. Until the day the sky rained fire, and the new enemy came among us. We stand now upon the brink of destruction, for the reign of chaos has come at last.
Warcraft 3 was for many people their introduction into the story of Warcraft. There is a lot to be said about this game and its influence, both from its story, its style, and the map editor that gave birth to a new genre of games. But on this channel I would like to specifically talk about the game's story. I don't suppose it would be controversial to say that, in my opinion, Warcraft 3 was one of the best stories that Blizzard ever wrote. While the first two Warcraft games told the story of an alien race of monsters that came to ravage and burn a new world, and the valiant men that stood against them in defense of their homes, the conflict was strictly orcs and humans, with Warcraft 2 adding in a few other races like elves, dwarves, trolls, and goblins. Warcraft 3, released in 2002, paved the way to a larger world and a grander story. The Horde and Alliance must work together to combat new threats, with the addition of 2 new playable factions, and the introduction of a new continent. The way is paved for the return of the Burning Legion to Azeroth. For over 2 decades, the Orcs of the Horde and the humans of the Alliance have been locked in a vicious cycle of hatred and war. Stormwind was devastated by Blackhand during the First War, and the kingdoms of Lordaeron, Stromgarde, and Kul Tiras suffered heavy losses from Doomhammer's march north in the Second War. The Orcs' homeworld of Draenor was ripped apart, and many noble heroes on both sides of the conflict have fallen. While the Orcs languished in camps for years, they have risen up and cast off their shackles, under the leadership of Thrall, ready to carve their own place in this world. Yet the storm looms overhead, ready to set the whole of Azeroth to the flame. The Prophet has issued his warning to Thrall, and as he awakens from his nightmares, Thrall hears the voice of a raven calling to him, "Seek me out." The first mission of the game serves as a tutorial for all of the new features that were added to Warcraft 3. The jump between the first 2 Warcraft games was quite large, with Warcraft 2 adding quality of life changes, naval combat, and a number of new units, and Warcraft 3 continues with this level of innovation. Most notably, heroic units are a new addition to Warcraft, which differentiate themselves from regular units by having a level system, an inventory, scaling stats, and most importantly, 4 abilities that can be unlocked and upgraded. In addition to that, there are now neutral creatures around the map like gnolls, ogres, and golems that can be fought for experience and items. Lastly, a day-night cycle is explained, with most neutral enemies falling asleep at night, and the sight range of all units being reduced. Having rallied a few warriors and fought his way across the river, Thrall meets with the Prophet, who warns the war chief that the only way to save his people is to sail to the Forgotten Lands in the west, for demons are returning to Azeroth. The clans have been mobilized, and the Horde constructs a small base to house them once they arrive. The only one left unaccounted for is the Warsong clan, and it would not take long to figure out that they had run into trouble on their approach. Nearby, a human encampment launches an attack against the Orc base, alerting them to a number of Orc prisoners held in cages at the town. Not only were the Warsong captured, but their chieftain, Gromosh Hellscream, has also been imprisoned. Not willing to leave anyone behind, Thrall rallies his forces to rescue them. Thankfully, neither Grom or his forces were injured, and with the Horde assembled, they can prepare to leave human lands for good. Stealing a number of ships from the nearby harbor, the Horde sneaks out from under the noses of Lordaeron's forces and begin their long journey to Kalimdor. I always forget these missions were re-added in Frozen Throne. Thrall's ships were forced to take shelter on an island after encountering severe storms, where they come across a strange troll watching them. Sen'jin, leader of the Darkspear tribe, warns Thrall that this island used to be his people's, but that humans have recently made landfall as well. The Darkspear enlist Thrall's help as their combined forces strike out at the Kultiran expedition, led by Sanath Tidebringer. Along the way, they help purify a fountain of healing for Sen'jin before tearing down the settlement on the west side of the island. Unfortunately, even as the last of the humans fall, the battle is not over. Fish-like creatures called murlocs climb out of the sea and attack the Horde, ultimately capturing them and dragging them off to a nearby cave as prisoners. The murlocs had been peaceful up until recently, when the sea witch Zarjira took command of them. The orcs and trolls are being held as sacrifices, but Thrall breaks his way out of his cell and begins to make his way through the cave, rescuing any other prisoners he comes across. As he frees more orcs and trolls, it becomes apparent that Sen'jin is set to be the Murlocs' latest sacrifice to their goddess. And although Thrall does his best to reach the old troll in time, he finds he is too late to stop the Murloc sorcerer from conducting the ritual. The island's volcano is set to burst, and with his dying breath, Sen'jin asks Thrall to lead his people off of the island. Thrall accepts Sen'jin's request, and with little other choice, as the island is soon to be dragged under the waves, the Darkspears swear their allegiance to Thrall's horde. As Thrall emerges into the open air, the situation is dire. The volcano has begun its eruption, Darkspear forces are scattered around the island, their ships are in need of repairs, and Zarjira's Murlocs are on the hunt for them. Repairs to the ships will need to be done quickly, and the remaining trolls will need to be rounded up or be left to die on the island. The ships would need to be defended as the peons worked on repairs, as Murlocs assaulted the Orcs' base to try and destroy the only way off of the island. Even as larger waves of fish monsters launched themselves at Thrall's defenses, the Orcs held them off just long enough for the repairs to be finished, and the remaining Orcs and Trolls to evacuate onto the ships. Zarjira curses them as they flee, calling out that the dark tide will swallow them all. But even as the island sinks into the waves, Thrall turns his eyes west. It is in Kalimdor where the destiny of the Horde will unfold, and where they will stand against the demons of the Burning Legion. Lordaeron is beset by problems from all sides. The Horde is active once again, and a plague has been spreading through the Eastweald. The mages of the Kirin Tor advise for quarantine, but the other nations of the Alliance think them to just be paranoid old wizards, and that the plague is simply nothing more than a passing disease. As it would turn out, there is truth to what the Dalaran ambassador speaks, so says the prophet. Arriving at the court of the Alliance, he pleads his case to any who will listen, that the plague is only the beginning of what is to come, and that the only hope of survival lies in the ancient and forgotten lands of Kalimdor to the west. Yet his warning falls on deaf ears as the Alliance Council removes him from their court. The prophet has already failed mankind once before, nearly delivering it straight into the hands of the Burning Legion, and now that he has returned to Azeroth, he intends to ensure its survival. If the wise leaders of the Alliance cannot see what is about to play out before them, then perhaps there are others out in the lands of Lordaeron who will. The Orcs have been raiding villages, and so Tyrannus sent his son Arthas, to meet with the great Uther the Lightbringer to investigate the situation. Greeting each other as old friends, Uther takes his men to deal with a nearby orc encampment, while Arthas rushes to Strombrad to bolster its defenses. Their scouts have reported that a group of orcs is on their way to the nearby town, and that it is completely defenseless. The road is dangerous, however, as Arthas frees young Timmy from a band of gnolls and deals with a group of bandits that have been stealing from the populace of the countryside. Yet when they arrive at Strombrad, they are already too late. The orcs have begun to raid the town and burn it to the ground. The orcs are rounding up the villagers and bringing them back to their encampment, and while Arthas may have been too late to save those that have already been taken, he confronts the slave master that leads the orcs in the area, taking him down. With Strombrad secured, he rushes to meet with Uther at the orc encampment. Two of Uther's best knights were sent to parley with the orc leader, and as Arthas arrives to meet with Uther, so too do their horses. Though Uther tempers Arthas' desire to avenge the knights, he does offer Arthas the opportunity to lead the attack against the orc camp, while he remains behind to protect their own camp against any incursions. Meanwhile, at the orc camp, the Blade Master of the Blackrock clan has begun to sacrifice their prisoners to their demonic masters. This only further spurns Arthas into action as he rallies his soldiers into the orc's base and battles the Blade Master. With the help of a flaming orb made from the heart of the black dragon Cyronox and crafted by the dwarves, the Blade Master stood little chance. Still, it is a bit disturbing to see the orcs attempting to summon demons into Azeroth, but Uther assures him that the orcs are merely holding on to their own dying traditions, and that the warlocks and their demons were defeated long ago in the Second War. After a long day of service, the two paladins head back for home. 2 weeks after Arthas defeated the orcs, the Prophet meets with Antonidas and Dalaran. Although the Archmage does not listen to the warning, his nearby apprentice does listen in on their conversation. Once the Prophet leaves, Antonidas turns his attention towards her and the two discuss matters of the plague. Antonidas believes that the plague may be magical in nature, and so he needs Jaina to go into the Eastweald and investigate any such reports of the plague. As it could be potentially dangerous, Antonidas arranged for Arthas to escort her through the area. 3 days later, Arthas and his men await Jaina for hours, with the prince reassuring his men that she has a habit of being fashionably late. As she arrives, she proves herself more than capable of handling herself, but welcomes the company of Arthas and his knights. The prince and the sorceress head out along the King's Road to see if any of the nearby villages have been affected by the plague, unaware of what they will encounter. Not long into their journey, Arthas and Jaina are hindered by a collapsed bridge. According to the townsfolk, someone on the other side destroyed it, forcing them to take an alternative route. Upon reaching the other side, they are assaulted by a wave of undead skeletons. The entire village was raised in undeath, and the source quickly becomes apparent when they come across an infected grain silo. The land around the silo is blighted and dying, but the seal on the crates matches that of Anderhall, a major distributor of grain in northern Lordaeron. Continuing with their investigation, they fight their way through the village, where necromancers are seen working their twisted magic and raising the dead. According to some elves, a grain warehouse lies at the other end of the village. When Arthas and Jaina go to inspect the plagued grain, they meet a man dressed in dark robes who quickly escorts his cultists away and lets loose several skeletons and an abomination of several corpses sewn together. Only more questions were raised in their journey, but the answers they seek may lie in Anderhall. The cult has been seen skulking around the area of Anderhall, and so Jaina and Arthas rally as many men as they are able to and depart for the city, fighting their way through an encampment of undead. When they finally breach into the city, they find the man from before, who introduces himself as Kel'Thuzad, leader of the Cult of the Damned and architect of the plague. The undead monstrosities are bound to a demon named Mal'Ganis, and the purpose of the plague is to scour Lordaeron of all life. Kel'Thuzad tells Arthas that the answers he seeks lie in Stratholme with Mal'Ganis, and flees further into Anderhall. The grain has already been sent out from the city, and so with the necromancers back to the wall, Jaina and Arthas give chase. More abominations block their way, created in the wheeled slaughterhouses on the far end of the city, and after tearing them down, Kel'Thuzad is easily felled. With his dying breath, he warns Arthas that his death means little in the long run. Arthas and Jaina arrive the following day at Hearthglen, eager for rest, but their hopes would be quickly dashed. Overnight, a large undead force popped up and began attacking villages at random. Jaina teleports away to get Uther's help while Arthas remains behind to see to it that Hearthglen is defended. The plague was never simply meant to kill those that it had infected, but it would also raise them in undeath. The undead scourge set to work on their mission of destroying all life in Lordaeron, and threw their countless numbers against Hearthglen's defenses. Nearby, a large shipment of infected grain traveled from village to village, killing more in its wake. Their numbers swelled with each village that fell, and they attacked en masse. Just as Arthas was being overrun, Uther arrived with a legion of his knights, and together they drove the undead back. Hearthglen was only the beginning, and so Arthas vows to go to Stratholme and strike down Mal'Ganis himself. Uther's attempts at calming him down are fruitless, as Arthas tells Uther that, with or without him, he's going to Stratholme. The Prophet stops Arthas on the road, attempting to warn him that the further he tries to save his people, the faster he will deliver them into the hands of the enemy. The only way to save his people is to head to Kalimdor, but Arthas sends him away, even with Jaina questioning whether the old man does know what is coming. At Stratholme, Uther arrives to meet Arthas and Jaina. As they look on into the city, Arthas realizes that they are already too late. The plague has gripped the city, and soon they will all turn into the undead. The only solution is to strike them down before that happens. Appalled, Uther refuses the order, and when Arthas attempts to pull rank as future king, Uther refuses to yield. Claiming this to be treason, Arthas revokes Uther of his paladinship and disbands his knights. As Uther leaves, he is joined by Jaina. Although Arthas reaches out to her looking for support, she cannot simply stand by and watch him murder an entire town of innocent people. Inside Stratholme, the demonic dreadlord Mal'Ganis has already begun his work. Leading an army of ghouls and abominations, he moves to transform the city household by household into the undead. Witnessing this, Arthas vows that it's better that his people die by his hand than serve as monsters. What proceeded could only be called a massacre. Both Arthas and Mal'Ganis razed Stratholme to the ground. Some were killed in their sleep, or after they had already risen as zombies, while others died fleeing from their beloved prince. Those that tried to escape from the city were cut down by the Scourge, lying in wait just outside of the city walls. With the city in ruins, Arthas confronts Mal'Ganis, intent on finishing the conflict once and for all, only for the Dreadlord to tell him that if he wishes to fight him, then he would need to lead his men into Northrend. As Mal'Ganis escapes, Arthas calls out to him, vowing to hunt him down to the ends of the earth if he has to. Only those that managed to hide from the two armies were spared, but Stratholme was nothing but a smoldering ruin choked with corpses, the dead collected into great piles to be burned and cleared from the streets. As Jaina walks through the wreckage, staring on in horror, Uther comes looking for her. Arthas and Lordaeron's army have vanished, and while Jaina warned him that it sounded like a trap when he came to her, asking her to journey with him, Arthas ultimately sailed north to chase Mal'Ganis. Cursing his name, Uther rushes back to Capital City to have Tyrannus recall the army, reassuring Jaina she had no part in Arthas' actions. At last, the Prophet approaches Jaina, warning her that the dead in Stratholme will stir once more. Even though Arthas may have only been doing what he thought was right, only death awaits him down this path. But if Jaina wishes to save the survivors of Lordaeron, she would need to lead them west. Only there does her people stand any chance of surviving. Having arrived at the shores of the frozen north, Arthas leads his men into the shadows of Northrend, fending off wolves, trolls, and strange, spider-like Nerubians. When they finally find a gold mine, they are pelted with gunfire, which quickly ceases as their attackers realize they aren't undead. Muradin Bronzebeard, Arthas' former mentor, had led his men north seeking a legendary sword named Frostmourne, but he was cut off from his men by the undead, and had been holding out against their endless waves, sending out distress calls. With Arthas' help, the two of them break through the Scourge base and rescue Muradin's men, before Arthas directs their forces at Mal'Ganis. Marching into his base, they launch a flurry of steel and cannon fire, reducing the encampment to rubble. The Dreadlord, however, is nowhere to be seen, and so Arthas establishes the area as his force's main base, and turning to Muradin to ask about the sword he and his men came to find. An emissary from Lordaeron arrives at Arthas' camp, informing everyone that King Tyrannus has recalled the expedition to Northrend. With the roads overrun with the undead, his forces decide to cut through the trees back to their boats. When Arthas arrives and sees his men gone, he chooses to recruit the help of the nearby trolls and ogre mercenaries to burn down the ships. While Muradin is a bit apprehensive, he helped Arthas all the same as they cut their way through the roads. Ghouls, necromancers, and more vile abominations halt their path, along with more Nerubians and a long trench with scourge towers lining the cliffs above, but Arthas presses on, making sure each ship is burned down to their frames. When at last his men reach the shore, Arthas turns on the mercenaries, blaming them for the destruction of their only way back home. With their deaths, the truth of Arthas' actions are hidden to his men, and he returns them to their posts, telling them that there is no way home other than through victory. Mal'Ganis has launched his forces against Arthas' base, and without reinforcements they will quickly fall. But perhaps, if Arthas and Muradin can find Frostmourne, it will be their salvation. Leading a small force through a nearby waygate, they fight their way into the sword's chamber. The revenants guarding it hold an ominous warning, saying they were protecting the prince from the sword. Within the chamber, an inscription on the sword's dais reads, "Whomsoever takes up this blade shall wield power eternal. Just as the blade rends flesh, so must power scar the spirit." Though Muradin urges Arthas to turn back and leave the cursed sword alone, Arthas, having damned his men in pursuit of his vengeance, calls out to whatever spirits rest in the cavern that he will pay any price to save his people. With Muradin dead and Frostmourne in Arthas' hands, the only matter left to attend to is Mal'Ganis. With Frostmourne's power, the undead are torn apart and quickly fall before its might. Reaching the Dreadlord, he taunts the prince that the voices he heeds from the blade is that of the Lord of the Damned. The Lich King himself whispers through the blade, and in his pursuit of vengeance, he has delivered himself right into the hands of the Scourge. Smugly, Mal'Ganis asks Arthas, "What does the Dark Lord of the Dead tell you now?" Listening to the whispers, Arthas tells Mal'Ganis that the time for his vengeance has come, before plunging the sword into Mal'Ganis' chest. From there, Arthas wanders off into the frozen wasteland of Northrend. Over months, the whispers of Frostmourne wore away at what remained of Arthas' sanity, and as he gave himself over to the will of the Lich King, he gathered his men and set sail, intent on returning home to Lordaeron. With Arthas' triumph over evil, word of his return swept through Lordaeron. Great feasts and celebrations were held, and many flocked to Capital City to witness their beloved prince. Tyrannus, racked with worry, welcomed his son with open arms, but as Arthas kneeled before the throne, he spoke to his father. For the last 50 years, Tyrannus sat on the throne and suffered through the Second War and its aftermath. Now his service was no longer needed. Arthas' captains moved to slaughter all else in the room, while Arthas himself strode forward and seized his father. Tyrannus, asking what Arthas was doing, would only receive the answer,
Succeeding you, father.
The crown of Lordaeron clattered to the ground, and in the aftermath would be lost to the world forevermore. With the death of Tyrannus, Lordaeron had fallen to ruin, and from its ashes, the Scourge rises. In the wreckage of Lordaeron, a Dreadlord appears before Arthas and introduces himself as Tichondrius. He praises Arthas for the work he has done so far, but the Lich King has further use for him. First and foremost, the cult of the Dam must be rallied. As Arthas sets off toward the nearby villages, one of the cultists assures him that all is as Kel'Thuzad foretold, but that word has spread of Arthas' betrayal. Without a sizable force, Arthas and his ghouls are forced to sneak their way through the countryside, slaying villagers and alerting the cultists that it is time to come out of hiding, while avoiding the patrolling footmen and knights. After visiting a nearby graveyard to boost his meager forces, the rest of the acolytes are alerted and await their prince by Tichondrius. Although Lordaeron lies in ruins, the cultists will prove useful for the task that lies ahead. Setting forth for Anderhall, Tichondrius instructs Arthas that the former leader of the cult, Kel'Thuzad, will need to be resurrected. Prior to his death, Kel'Thuzad was an incredibly powerful necromancer, and thus his resurrection can only occur at a place of substantial magical energy. As no place exists nearby, meat wagons are brought in to carry the remains, as well as to knock down the barricades put in place by Gavinrad the Dire, one of the former paladins of the Silver Hand. Gavinrad is the first to fall, but upon approaching the tomb, Kel'Thuzad's remains are too badly decomposed and will require a special urn to make the journey north to quell the loss. where the elves' Sunwell will provide more than enough magic for the resurrection. Yet along the road, other members of the Silver Hand bar the way. Balador the Bright chastises Arthas, telling him that due to his actions, Uther has stripped himself of his own honor, while Sage Truthbringer admonishes him for breaking Uther's heart. Both fall before the Scourge war machine, leaving only one paladin remaining between Arthas and the urn. Uther was the first paladin and a founding member of the Order of the Silver Hand. He was a hero of the Second War and became a close friend of King Taranis. So close a friend, Taranis asked Uther to train Arthas as a paladin. The two of them began to grow close, becoming good friends, with Uther trying to settle Arthas's darker tendencies. Yet here the two of them stand facing against each other. Uther, defending the tomb of his king and his friend, is forced to confront his former student and seeing the monster he had become. When the two of them engaged in combat, it was a long and hard-fought battle, with neither side giving ground. But before Uther could land the killing blow, Arthas gained the upper hand and bent the paladin to his knees, leaving just enough time for Uther to speak his dying words.
I dearly hope that there's a special place in hell waiting for you, Arthas.
We may never know, Uther. I intend to live forever.
The twisting nether, realm of demons and home of the burning legion. Within this festering hellscape, Tichondrius arrives to answer the summons of his brethren Enetheron and Mephistoth. One of the Sargerai lords of the Burning Legion, Lord Archimond, demands a report on the progress of Azeroth's invasion. So it would seem, Arthas has been performing a little too well of late, and Tichondrius is beginning to suspect that perhaps Ner'zhul has ulterior motives for his new pet. Such a thought is quickly brushed off, however, as the Lich King would not dare anger his masters. Should Tichondrius fail to control Ner'zhul and the Scourge, it will be their heads on the chopping block. And yet, Arthas heeds not the voice of the Lich King alone. With the remains secured, Kel'Thuzad whispers in the prince's ear. He tells Arthas that the Dreadlords are the Lich King's jailers, and that upon the hour of his rebirth, Kel'Thuzad will reveal the truth of the Scourge's invasion. The lush and vibrant land of the elves is one that Arthas has not visited since he was a child, and Kel'Thuzad reminds him that the elves are not to be underestimated. Using the meat wagons to break their way in through the trees, their prisoners inform them that there are two gates that stand between the Scourge and the city of Silvermoon. Barring the way is the Ranger General of the High Elves, Sylvanas Windrunner, the younger sister of Illyria. Though she tries to hold him off with hit-and-run tactics, the outlying elven cities are broken beneath the might of the Scourge war machine, each one ground to dust under the claws of ghouls and the flying corpses of the meat wagons. The first elf gate was swept away under a tide of bone, and Sylvanas was forced to retreat her forces back to the second gate, with Arthas following closely behind. The Scourge chased the retreating elves to a great river, where Sylvanas makes her stand, taunting Arthas. The second elf gate is impenetrable except for a special key that was separated into 3 pieces. In an attempt to further slow them down, the bridge is destroyed, forcing Arthas to rely on the nearby goblins for passage across the river. The fragments of the 3 keys are luckily held nearby on special altars, guarded by warded towers and elven forces. These altars are separated by vast distances, but luckily for Arthas, a number of nearby waygates are connected to the 3 keys, allowing the Scourge to drop in on the enemy defenses and obliterate them. With the key assembled, only the defenses entrenched around the gate are left. With the goblins' help, Arthas makes it across the water, and the elves are slaughtered as Arthas uses the key to unlock the gate. The path to Silvermoon now lies exposed, with Sylvanas' forces retreating further into elven lands. The Scourge base lies on the very doorstep of Silvermoon City, and Sylvanas plays her final hand. From her encampment nearby, runners are sent along the road to call out for reinforcements and to warn Silvermoon of the ravenous undead marching towards them. Unfortunately for Sylvanas, gargoyles laying in wait quickly descend and cut down the runner, and pursue any others they attempt to send out. Sylvanas would not be spared Arthas' wrath, as a quick detour from their primary objective brings the undead horde down on their base. Valiantly the elves fought until the bitter end, but one by one each warrior fell until only Sylvanas remained and was dragged before Arthas himself. Bent down on her knees, she asks Arthas for a quick and clean death, but for all the trouble she has been, Arthas has something else in mind than giving Sylvanas the peace of death. Ripping the soul from her body, Sylvanas is turned into a wailing banshee and made to serve the scourge in the destruction of her homeland. The Sunwell lies at the heart of Silvermoon City, and it is from there that the elves feast upon its magic. Built upon the convergence of many powerful ley lines, the elves are unlikely to give it up easily. They would die to defend their home, which Arthas is only too happy to indulge. The resulting siege was a slaughter, devastating the elven population, and Arthas personally ended the reign of King Anastarian Sunstrider. In total, 90% of their population was wiped out as Arthas made his way to the Sunwell Plateau. There, after slaying its guardians, he would dump the remains of Kel'Thuzad into its light-blessed waters, which would become tainted with necromantic energies, and Kel'Thuzad would rise once again as a powerful lich. With his resurrection, Arthas holds Kel'Thuzad to his promise to tell him everything he knows about the Burning Legion. Happy to oblige, Kel'Thuzad leads the Death Knight somewhere private, away from the prying eyes and ears of the Dreadlords. Traveling south into the Alterac Mountains, Arthas and Kel'Thuzad converse. Even before their first encounter, Kel'Thuzad knew Arthas would slay him and later resurrect him, as the Lich King chose Arthas as his champion long ago. Yet, for all of the Lich King's power, he was imprisoned by the Dreadlords after Ner'zhul left Draenor all those years ago. The Burning Legion itself is a vast army of demons led by the fallen titan Sargeras, along with his two great generals, Archimonde the Defiler and Kil'jaeden the Deceiver. Their sole purpose is to wipe out all life from the universe and have destroyed countless other worlds. The Scourge was created to wipe out any who would oppose their return, such as the forces of Lordaeron or the High Elves, and the Dreadlords were put in place to ensure the Lich King's success. Now the way is paved for their return, and the first phase of the demon's plan has been fulfilled. Here in Alterac, the second phase is already being put in motion. The second phase involves summoning Archimonde into Azeroth to kick off the demonic invasion. Luckily, there were a number of orcs from the Blackrock clan that refused to follow Thrall west. After being freed from the internment camps, their warlocks predicted demons would return to Azeroth and adopted their demon-worshipping ways once more, so far as maintaining a nearby demon gate Kel'Thuzad could use to communicate with Archimonde. The Orcs hold no favor with the Legion following their failure to claim Azeroth in the Second War, so this renegade group of Blackrock Orcs would be put down and their champions cut down as examples of all who would oppose the Scourge. With the path to the gate littered with corpses, Kel'Thuzad calls out to Archimonde, receiving a vision of him through the demon gate and receiving further instructions. In order to summon the Demon Lord, the last spellbook of Medivh, once used by Ner'zhul on Draenor, must be collected from the city of Dalaran, and the ritual performed at twilight 3 days from now. At the gates of Dalaran, Arthas calls out for the city to surrender. Archmage Antonidas rides out to meet him in response, warning Arthas that the Kirin Tor have already prepared for the Scourge's arrival. A magical veil has been placed over the city that causes any undead caught inside to wither and decay, rendering them unable to even drag themselves on. The effect isn't instant, however, meaning that Arthas and Kel'Thuzad will need to work quickly to kill the 3 wizards maintaining the field, allowing them to freely roam the city without reprisal. Fordred Aran valiantly held the gates to the city, and Nihilus Arcanister, just across a series of canals, attempted to fend off the undead, but both were cut down by Arthas. Antonidas was more formidable, however, summoning watery elementals and raining ice down upon the undead, but he would fall all the same, his soul devoured by Frostmourne. With the field down, the Scourge charged into Dalaran, allowing Kel'Thuzad to find the Book of Medivh and prepare for the ritual of that sunset. The ritual has been prepared, and as Kel'Thuzad assumes his position at the center of the ritual circle, Arthas establishes defending the altar. The remaining forces of the Kirin Tor that had survived the Scourge attack had rallied together, determined to stop the summoning. The Archmages and their forces do their best to force their way through the erected ziggurats, waves of skeletons, and hulking Nerubians, but as time drags on, the veil between Azeroth and the twisting nether grows thin. Demonic fellhounds and infernals crash onto the battlefield, supplying Arthas with reinforcements. Their efforts would prove futile as Kel'Thuzad finishes the ritual and Archimonde the Defiler steps foot onto Azeroth. With the Lich King's purpose fulfilled, the Scourge is put under the command of the Dreadlords. Though Arthas is infuriated with the outcome, Kel'Thuzad urges him patience, as Ner'zhul has already foreseen this outcome and has plotted accordingly. The wizards of Dalaran have done their best to try and fend off the return of the Legion, and as his first act on this world, Archimonde decides to make an example out of them. The battle to take Dalaran had been one that was hard fought by the Scourge, but with a simple display of power, drawing a simulacrum of the city out of the sand. Archimonde topples the city with ease. When the Scourge first marched for the city, evacuations had begun, but they were not completed. Many died when the city collapsed, and many others were left trapped by the fallen debris. The Kirin Tor attempted to reclaim control of the city, but malformed experiments, berserk elementals, and mad wizards left the ruins in chaos. Not even the Horde had done as much damage in the Second War during the siege. Yet with but a clench of Archimonde's hands, the great ivory towers crumbled away. Tearing his eyes away from the ruins, Archimonde's forces would be directed west into Kalimdor, where the demon's ancient enemies lay waiting for them. After having passed through a savage storm, Thrall's ships crash into a strange and barren shore. Many of their forces, including Grom, were left separated from the storm, but if they made it through, they'd be along the coast. As they travel across the rugged landscape, rescuing the orcs and trolls they find, Thrall's men also encounter centaurs, harpies, and pigmen called Quilboar. In a nearby valley, the centaur seem to be charging north, dressed for war, and the reasoning soon becomes apparent. The great and noble bullmen called Tauren live in the area, led by Cairn Bloodhoof. Thrall catches Cairn's attention as they fight off the centaur, and mentions an oracle far to the north. As it turns out, Cairn's village also lies to the north, on the path the centaur are marching, and so Thrall and Cairn race back to the village, defending it from waves of the marauders. The centaur have driven off the game in the area, and so the Tauren have packed up their camp to head west into the plains of Mulgore. Thrall offers to help escort Cairn in exchange for information on the oracle. The Kodo beasts used to carry the supplies are overburdened, and so the caravan moves from one oasis to the next to allow them moments of rest. Along their journey, the centaur hunt the caravan, their speed unrivaled on the open fields. Luckily, Warsong survivors lay on the path as well, searching for Thrall, and readily join the caravan. After making their way through a long, rocky pass, the centaur chasing at their heels, Cairn collapses the nearby rocks to cut off the path behind them. At last, the Tauren have reached Mulgore, and Thrall is ready to search for his people's destiny. Far to the north, at the base of Mount Hyjal, lies Stone Talon Peak. There lies the home of the Oracle, and after thanking his newfound friend, Thrall rallies his forces to head north. Back in Lordaeron, Tichondrius checks in with the great pit lord called Manaroth. The remaining humans in the region offer no real resistance to the Legion, as the Scourge did its job well of weakening Azeroth's defenders, unlike a certain failed race. Years ago on Draenor, the Orc warlock Gul'dan made a deal with Manaroth, and by convincing the other Orcs to drink the pit lord's blood, they would sell their souls to the Legion. The Orcs were the Legion's second attempt at claiming Azeroth, but when they failed, the Fellfire burnt out in their veins while they languished in the internment camps. The Orcs are still bound to Manaroth's blood pact, however, and he has come searching for them. The Orcs are not in Lordaeron anymore, but have instead arrived at Kalimdor, and according to Archimonde, they may still have their part to play in all of this, despite their previous failure. After traveling for a week through the desert, Thrall hears bells off in the distance. Upon investigation, they arrive at a human settlement where Grom and the Warsong are burning it to the ground. Once the fighting ceases, Grom explains that the humans are being led by a girl named Proudmoore, and that they have cut off the path north. Thrall sends out scouts to find a nearby goblin workshop to secure a zeppelin up to Stone Talon Peak, but Grom, despite being given orders to avoid the humans, grows impatient and leads a party to attack them. With the humans now aware of their presence, Thrall is forced to assist Grom in clearing out the other bases before purchasing the zeppelins. After making the deal with the local goblins, Thrall turns his attention to Grom, chastising him for disobeying a direct order. Grom has been taking pleasure in fighting the humans, commenting that it feels just like the old days, but his bloodlust is starting to become a liability. Thrall heads north to see the Oracle, while Grom is told to stay behind and construct a settlement for when they return. In the nearby forests of Ashenvale, the Warsong clan start setting up their new settlement. Grom curses Thrall for delegating his greatest warriors to manual labor, but his thoughts are cut short by one of his men. Apparently, some of the orcs are growing frightened of the forest, believing them to be haunted. The settlement will require a great amount of lumber, however, and so Grom sets his workers back to the task of cutting down trees. Their presence agitates those hiding in the shadows, and strange warrior women begin attacking them. They look like elves, but they seem taller and more savage than any elves from Quel'Thalas. As Grom explores the forest, he finds great trees guarded by the strange elves, and so he slaughters their forces and brings down the trees, quickly swelling their resources. Once the Warsong have enough lumber and the elves have been driven off deeper into Ashenvale, they begin work on constructing the settlement. After 10,000 years, demons set foot in Ashenvale Forest once again. The first invasion of the Burning Legion was also known as the War of the Ancients. The power that flowed forth from the sacred Well of Eternity would be used to summon the Legion in exchange for purging the lesser races from Azeroth. Many Night Elves rebelled against Ajara. Along with the Dragonflights, they would fight back against the Legion and banish them from the world. In doing so, however, the Well of Eternity would collapse in on itself, causing a cataclysm referred to as the Sundering. The great land of Kalimdor would be broken into the various continents, and the Night Elves would quietly go into hiding. If the demon's plans are to succeed, Cenarius will have to be dealt with. The Blood Pact still binds the Orcs to Manaroth, and after spilling his blood into a nearby pool, the Pit Lord and Tichondrius quickly hide away, waiting for the corruption to lure the Orcs into drinking the blood once more. From atop a hill, the demigod Cenarius watches as the Orcs defile the ancient woods, and decides to drive them off. The nearby trees come alive and attack the Orcs as the Night Elves and their forces quickly charge in behind them. The Orcs would retreat across the river and entrench themselves there as the rest of their settlement is destroyed. Once the Orcs have retreated, Cenarius regrows the forests and prepares to wipe them out. One of the troll witch doctors senses a strange and dark power emanating from the woods, and so Grom decides to investigate, believing it may be a way to stop Cenarius. There in the nearby woods lies a blood-red pool. The witch doctor smells the stench of demons coming from it, but Grom, already having been cursed, decides to drink from the pool. Some of the Orcs with him point out that this goes against everything Thrall has taught them, but Grom insists that their rage must instead be embraced. Stronger than ever before, the Warsong embrace the demon's curse. With this newfound strength, even Cenarius would fall before them. The demigod cowers in the woods, but Grom would draw him out. Leading his forces back across the river, Grom sets to work in tearing apart the Night Elves and their encampment. Taken by surprise by the newfound strength of the Orcs, the Night Elves quickly fell in a tide of blood and steel. When at last Cenarius did step out from the shadows to confront Grom, he found the Orcs now stood on equal footing with his own strength. With a savage war cry, the Orcs would kill the demigod, and the remaining Night Elves would flee into the forests. As the Warsong celebrated their victory, Manaroth would emerge, binding the Orcs once more to himself. Though Grom initially refuses, stating that he and the Orcs are free of him, Manaroth points out that it was his blood that they drank from, and that they would be forever bound to serve him and to forever serve the Legion. The scouts sent up to Stone Talon Peak have reported the humans have entrenched themselves all the way up to the summit. Thrall will have to fight his way up, but he will not need to fight alone. Cairn arrives to help the Orcs reach the Oracle and repay the debt they owe. The humans' presence has upset the nearby wyverns and has driven them off of their homes at the summit into the waiting claws of the Harpies. After killing the Harpies and freeing the wyverns, the Orcs look up towards the human base high up on the ridge. The humans had situated themselves where no ground forces could get to them, leaving them free to rain fire from above. But with the help of the wyverns and the goblin zeppelins, Thrall and his forces made their way up. Dropping in on the Lordaeron survivors, the Orcs proceeded to lay waste to the encampment. Jaina retreated into the caverns in search of the Oracle, with Thrall and Cairn quickly following behind. Within the Oracle's cave, the path splits off in two. Down the left path, Thrall, along with a small party of Orcs and Trolls, encounter all manner of spirits, quillboar, and other horrid monsters lurking in the darkness. The path forward is blocked by a living statue that requests Thrall bring her back her heart. Long ago, a Night Elf priestess once mocked the oracle's wisdom and was turned to stone as a punishment, but by bringing back her gemstone heart, the curse is broken, and she happily opens the door forward. Unfortunately, the spectral bridge that leads to the oracle's sanctum has vanished, preventing passage. Cairn, having gone down the right path, encounters a large pit filled with quillboar guarding some kind of gemstone. Flipping a nearby mechanism, the pit is rigged with a number of spikes that skewer the boarmen, allowing Cairn to retrieve the gemstone. Deeper down the path, Cairn reunites with Thrall, and with the gemstone in hand, the spectral bridge forward appears, allowing the group access to the innermost chamber. Within the Oracle's chamber, Jaina has already arrived. Before the two forces can engage each other, the Prophet appears before them, preventing any violence within this sacred place. The Oracle promised was the Prophet from Lordaeron, who has lured both the remainder of the Horde and Alliance here to unfold their destinies. It is here that the Prophet tells Thrall and the Orcs what has befallen Lordaeron, and that Jaina leads the survivors that managed to escape from the destruction. Now that it has fallen, the Burning Legion makes their way towards Kalimdor. Only by joining forces do the Horde or Alliance stand any chance of stopping them. Both Thrall and Jaina are apprehensive to suddenly join with the hated enemies of their races, but the Prophet warns Thrall that Grom has already fallen under demonic influence, and soon the entirety of the Orc race will fall back under their sway. As Thrall races off, the Prophet offers his words of wisdom to Jaina. Old enemies must unite against a common foe. Just over the nearby ridge lies the Warsong encampment, and Thrall, Cairn, and Jaina ready their strategy. Jaina gifts Thrall with a soul gem that will allow Thrall to capture Grom's spirit, and bring it back to their base to be cleansed of the demonic influence that has taken it. The two of them comment that they never thought they'd see the day their two races work together, before Jaina and Cairn set off to prepare their defenses. Yet as they rally their forces, the sky glows with an eerie green fire. As fel-infused orcs throw themselves at Thrall's defenses, fiery infernals rain down from the sky to join in the fray. Setting out isn't much better, as the Warsong have firmly established themselves in the area. With a heavy heart, Thrall is forced to fight his way through his own people, but if Grom, who is like a brother to Thrall, cannot be saved, then perhaps there is no hope for the rest of the orcs. After battling through hordes of ravenous fellhounds and hulking doomguards, Thrall and Cairn reach Grom, sitting on his throne. Thrall had always believed that the demons corrupted the Orcish race, but this was only half true. As he confronts Grom, the old warrior tells him otherwise. The Orcs willingly accepted Manaroth's offer. The first among them to accept the bargain was Grom himself, and it was he who damned their race. Enraged, Thrall charges at Grom, and the two would become locked in combat. The battle between the two was tense, but Thrall managed to gain the upper hand and capture Grom within the soul gem. With haste, he returns back to Jaina's base, where her priests and Thrall's shamans begin the ritual to purify his spirit. When at last the demon's influence has left Grom's body, he stands before Thrall, ashamed of giving in to his pride and recklessness, but Thrall brushes aside his apologies. The Orcs were still in danger of falling to the curse, but according to Grom, Manaroth was waiting in a nearby canyon. Thrall and Grom would set off to confront the Pit Lord and end the blood curse once and for all. On the border of Ashenvale Forest, Thrall and Grom carefully enter the dark and twisted canyon. Manaroth, lurking nearby, taunts the two of them before revealing himself. The Orcs belong to him, and he will not let go of them so easily. The Pit Lord shrugs off any attack thrown at him, and tosses Thrall into the nearby rocks. Turning his attention to Grom, he points out that Thrall would never understand the fire that burns within his soul. He and the Pit Lord are one and the same. Enraged, Grom charges at Manaroth, burying his axe in the demon's chest. The demon, letting out an agonized cry, erupts in a fiery explosion. Grom, badly injured from the blast, falls to the ground as Thrall limps over to him. With his dying words, Grom tells Thrall that the demon's fire has finally burnt out within him. With his final act, he has freed himself from the blood haze. With his final sacrifice, he has freed the Orcish race. Something dark is stirring within Ashenvale Forest, and Chandra's Feathermoon approaches the High Priestess of the Night Elves, Tyrande Whisperwind. They watch over a nearby settlement of humans and orcs whose alliance is still tenuous, kept in check by Duke Lionheart. They brazenly run rampant through these sacred woods, which Tyrande will personally ensure they will regret. Mustering her sentinels, she stalks through Ashenvale, hiding her forces in the underbrush and the moonlight. They would spring upon the human orc settlement and catch their prey by surprise. Lionheart would try to rally his forces to strike back, but in the ensuing chaos, the Night Elves would kill him and cause further panic. Tyrande would not get the chance to finish off the settlement, as fire begins to rain down from the skies, and the undead cut their way through the trees. She would pull her forces back and leave the humans and orcs to their fates, troubled by the demon's presence. Tyrande and her archers would race through the trees, followed closely behind by ghouls and doomguards. When at last they are cornered, Tychondrius and Archimonde reveal themselves to the priestess to gloat of their victory, promising that this time, the Night Elves will not be enough to stop them. Sensing a moment to escape, Tyrande conceals herself in the shadows and slips away. Under the eyes of the Legion, Tyrande quietly moves through the trees, careful not to attract any attention, and rescuing any sentinels she comes across. Their shadow meld only works at night, and so Tyrande would need to hurry and cross over the river to safety before the dawn breaks. With the use of abandoned ballista, the Night Elves leveled the Scourge base blocking their path and reached the settlement. The Scourge appeared out of nowhere and nearly overwhelmed the settlement, but Chandris managed to fend them off. After considering their situation, Tyrande realizes if they hope to fight back, they will need the assistance of the Druids. Since Cenarius is dead, Tyrande will need to awaken the Druids herself. Arriving at the sacred Moonglade, they find the undead cutting through the trees toward the barrow den of the great Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage. Within, the Druid slumbers, and his spirit has awoken within a realm of life known as the Emerald Dream. In order to awaken him, Tyrande will need to retrieve the Horn of Cenarius, but the way is blocked by a horde settlement. Without any time to lose, Tyrande and her forces punch their way through the settlement and contend with the 3 guardian spirits protecting the horn. With it in hand, she blows into the horn, rousing the Archdruid. As Malfurion wakes up, leaving the barrow den, he senses that the touch of decay has already begun to corrupt the lands and turns the trees against the undead, driving them back. It has been 1,000 years since Malfurion and Tyrande last laid eyes upon one another, but their reunion is cut short by the severity of the situation. Malfurion theorizes that Archimonde may attempt to scale Mount Hyjal and drain the energies of the World Tree, and upon seeing a nearby group of humans fighting back against the undead, ponders if they may be useful allies as well. It was the outsiders to their lands that killed Cenarius, however, so Tyrande cuts off this line of thinking, and instead looks to the barrow dens on the far side of Winterspring, where the Druids of the Talons slumber. After avoiding the clashing human and undead armies, they find the woods around the barrow dens have been corrupted by a cursed revenant. Not only this, but the Night Elf settlement in the area was corrupted by the Satyrs, and after slaying the Satyrs and corrupted Treants, Malfurion sounds the horn to awaken the Druids of the Talon. All that remains is awakening the Druids of the Claw deep below the earth. The barrow dens have been sealed for nearly 3,000 years, and yet demonic corruption has still found its way inside, twisting the fauna into nightmarish abominations. Descending into the depths, Malfurion and Tyrande come across a great door, and while Tyrande is interested in what is behind it, Malfurion refuses to open it. Behind the door lies the prison of his brother Illidan Stormrage, who betrayed their people long ago. Though Malfurion forbids Tyrande from entering, she remains headstrong that Illidan may help them, and so she enters regardless. Malfurion instead turns his attention to waking up the Druids of the Claw, but upon sounding the horn, the Druids have gone feral. Only by reaching the deepest reaches of the caves and sounding the horn once more do the Druids fully awaken, returning to their night elven forms. Entering Illidan's prison with a handful of her loyal sentinels, Tyrande presses onwards, praying she is right Illidan will help them. Even their goddess Elune has condemned him, but surely after 10,000 years of imprisonment, Illidan has changed. The wardens block her path, and so Tyrande is forced to cull them as she makes her way to the only cell of the prison. Along the way, she comes across caches of goblin explosives and an armory of warden weaponry, and puts them to use in reaching the betrayer. His cell is guarded by a druid of the grove, urging Tyrande to turn back, but she insists Illidan was a hero once, and he can be again. Upon reaching the cell, Tyrande allows Illidan to break free, informing him of the Legion's return. Though he owes nothing to their people, he once loved Tyrande, and agrees to fight against them if only for her. When at last he steps out of his prison, Malfurion confronts Illidan and the two trade verbal blows, with Tyrande breaking up the argument. Malfurion warns that before the end, the betrayer may just be the doom of them all. During the War of the Ancients, Illidan had fought alongside his brother Malfurion before he defected to the side of the Legion. His reasoning for doing so was to ultimately betray the Legion, but he would be branded as a betrayer of his people and imprisoned for his crimes. Now free to walk the world once again, he intends to show to all he is no villain, a proclamation challenged by a knight atop a nearby hill. Sensing death upon him, Illidan challenges the man to a fight, but the two combatants were equally matched. When asking for his reasoning in coming, Arthas offers Illidan the source of the corruption tainting the forests. The skull of the warlock Gul'dan is being used to transform the land into the Fellwood, and it lies in the hands of the demon Tichondrius, who also commands the Scourge. By stealing the skull and killing Tichondrius, both of them would benefit, and with this in mind, Illidan cuts through the demons guarding the skull. Though he stops the corruption of the woods, he considers the opportunity before him. Should he absorb the powers of the skull, Illidan will become more powerful than any of Archimonde's lieutenants. Illidan would draw in the skull's power once held by the Great Warlock. It would change his body and soul, becoming something entirely demonic. Nothing would stand in his way now, and Tichondrius would be the first to taste his wrath. Tichondrius would be caught off guard momentarily, but would face Illidan with a deadly ferocity. The Dreadlord's armor was tough to cut through with mortal instruments, but Illidan struck him with the same fell powers that fueled the demon. Against another demon, Tichondrius stood no chance, and he would be slain. When Malfurion and Tyrande arrive, they're horrified with what Illidan has done. The one controlling the undead may have been slain, but it was at the cost of Illidan's soul. Unable to even look at his brother, Malfurion banishes Illidan from their homeland and orders him never to return. A punishment Illidan accepts willingly as he takes his leave. 2 days after Illidan's departure, Malfurion and Tyrande arrive at a meeting place, beckoned by a great raven in a dream. Before long, two outsiders also arrive, introducing themselves as Thrall and Jaina. As Tyrande angrily informs them they are not welcome in these lands, the prophet arrives and offers the help of the two outsiders. Malfurion asks who this prophet is to promise their assistance, and the prophet reveals he is to blame for the Legion's return. Decades ago, he summoned the Orcs into Azeroth in his madness, and he was killed by those he called his friends. Even so, war raged across the Eastern Kingdoms for many long years after his death, and those that remained brought the Legion back to their world. Medivh, the last guardian of Azeroth, has returned to set things right at last, and to ensure the Legion fails in its efforts at destroying his world. And to this end, the forces of the Alliance, Horde, and Night Elves will need to stand together against Lord Archimonde. Archimonde has begun his march to the summit of Mount Hyjal, and Malfurion reminisces of long ago. Though the Legion was defeated 10,000 years ago, the Night Elves were left to their immortality as the world shattered, bound to the World Tree Nordrissel. Now the time has come to give that power back, and if they are questioning whether or not it is worth it to give up eternal life, then they have already held it for far too long. Malfurion rushes to the summit, preparing its defenses, while Jaina, Thrall, and Tyrande attempt to delay Archimonde. The first on the demon's path is Jaina, and while the humans attempt to hold off the undead as long as they are able, they are overwhelmed by the Scourge, and Jaina teleports her remaining forces to safety. Further up, Thrall holds out as long as he can, defying Archimonde that the Orcs are now free, before he too teleports to safety. Archimonde has become overconfident, and when his forces bear down on the Night Elves, they retreat and clear the path to the World Tree. With its power, the doom of Azeroth is ensured, were it not that Malfurion had already finished setting his trap. As Archimonde reaches Nordrissel, Malfurion blows into the Horn of Cenarius, springing the trap. Archimonde would embrace the tree, attempting to drain it of its power, but in his focus, he would fail to notice the spirits of the forest leaving their homes and amassing around him. They would surround him, trapping him, and the full power of Nordrissel would be unleashed upon him. The resulting burst of energy not only destroyed Archimonde, but burned the forests of Mount Hyjal, and stripped the Night Elves of their immortality and dominion over the wilds. But over time, the roots of the World Tree would heal, the forests would regrow, just as the rest of the world would mend its wounds. Nature herself fought back and banished the shadow. No longer does the world need to rely on guardians, as fate has always resided in mortal hands. With Azeroth saved, Medivh once again fades into the legends of history, leaving the humans, orcs, and night elves to shape their future as they see fit.
Betrayer. In truth, It was I who was betrayed. Still I am hunted. Still I am hated. Now my blind eyes see what others cannot. That sometimes the hand of fate must be forced. Unleash the tides of doom upon all those who would oppose us.
In June of 2003, a year following the release of Reign of Chaos, Blizzard would release the expansion titled The Frozen Throne. The expansion offered an additional 4 acts to the game, picking up after the events of Mount Hyjal, and focusing more heavily on Arthas and Illidan as well as the characters around them. Each of the 4 races would be given additional units, buildings, and heroes, several neutral heroes were introduced, and naval combat was brought back from Warcraft 2. The Frozen Throne would also introduce new races to the Warcraft series, such as the Naga and the Draenei, and expanded upon the map editor in a myriad of ways, which would be shown off using the Orc campaign. Overall, the expansion serves as the finale to Warcraft's RTS saga, and paved the way for not only the World of Warcraft, but set the stage for many of the expansions and storylines that came for years to come. Although the Legion was defeated, dark and twisted creatures still lurk in the shadows. One such dangerous creature is the monster known as Illidan Stormrage, and his former jailer, Maiev Shadowsong, along with her second-in-command Naisha, leads what remains of her wardens to try and hunt him down. Following his trail, it seems to split off in multiple directions, so Maiev divides her forces to search the woods. Traces of the Legion's influence can still be felt in the enraged furbolgs and a crazed wildkin, but demons aren't the only thing stalking the shores. Maiev and her forces encounter a strange serpentine race calling themselves the Naga, who are attempting to burn down a number of ships. Realizing they are aiding Illidan, Maiev directs her forces to the port of Nendis, where Illidan has already set sail. His Naga remain behind to burn the ships, but Maiev butchers them before they can all be destroyed. The Wardens would follow Illidan wherever he chose to flee, and no sea would keep Maiev from her prey. The Wardens would follow Illidan east, but the lands they arrive upon are not on any of their maps. Yet the ruins seem somewhat familiar, and Maiev recognizes the location as the ancient city of Suramar, which sunk below the waves during the War of the Ancients. Now they have been raised from the depths, and would not take long to figure out how. A lone orc resides nearby, introducing himself as Drakthul of the Stormreaver clan. He is the last of his clan and offers to tell his tale if Maiev silences the restless ghosts that haunt him. Just across the water, the spirits of the Twilight's Hammer, Blackrock, and Stormreaver clans battle one another, until Maiev puts them to rest. True to his word, Drakthul tells of how these broken isles came to be. Decades ago, the warlock Gul'dan raised the tomb of Sargeras from the sea floor, where the remains of the Dark Titan's avatar were buried. For his pride, him and the rest of their clan were torn apart by demons, and the broken isles have remained ever since. Exploring the nearby ruins, the immediate region seems to be largely uninhabited, with only bands of murlocs and a few sea giants to call it home. But perhaps further in, they will find the betrayer. The Broken Isles are still partially underwater, and after finding a number of ships nearby, Maiev continues to chase after Illidan. The waters are crawling with Naga, making navigation much more difficult. To the north, however, a large Naga encampment has been established, and after dismantling it, Maiev picks up the trail once again, following it to a great and decrepit temple. This crumbling ruin is the tomb of Sargeras, and Maiev watches silently as Illidan blows apart the doors and enters the tomb. The Naga remain behind to guard the entrance, and Maiev would spring a surprise attack, catching the serpents off guard. With the guards cleared away, the path to the tomb lies open, and Illidan would be trapped inside. Inside the tomb is quiet, and Naisha questions whether they are walking into a trap. Still, they must press on, and early on in their search they come across Orcish runes written into the walls. When Gul'dan opened the tomb, he documented his journey through its depths. Gul'dan was seeking a power deep within the tomb, within the Chamber of the Eye. He would send his warlocks to scout through the tomb, whose skeletons Maiev and her wardens now must cut their way through. Blindly, Gul'dan led them to their deaths and their undead spirits' hunger for vengeance. More glyphs further in reveal that Gul'dan's minions did not get far, torn apart by demons, and that Gul'dan himself journeyed through most of the tomb alone. The echoing laughter of Sargeras taunted him throughout his journey, and Naisha and Maiev consider what the mysterious eye could be. Just outside of the chamber is Gul'dan's final journal. He had been ambushed by the tomb's guardians, and at the doorway to his prize, Gul'dan would take his final breaths. Gul'dan's writings aren't the only unsettling discovery to be found. The Wardens come across a statue of Queen Ajara who betrayed the Night Elf Empire to the Legion. But disturbingly enough, the statue bears a long serpentine tail, leaving her looking much more like the Naga than any Night Elf. Illidan's Naga also block the path, led by one named Lady Vash. She informs Maiev that their two races have more in common than Maiev suspects, as the Naga were once Night Elves. During the War of the Ancients, the Highborn loyal to Queen Ajara sequestered themselves away in their capital of Nazjatar. When the Sacred Well of Eternity exploded, splitting the continents, Nazjatar sunk below the waves, taking the Highborn with it. Under the waves, they were cursed, twisting their forms into the hideous Naga. For the last 10,000 years, they have been waiting to reclaim the surface, and with Illidan's help, they shall. Enraged, Maiev would cut down the Naga in the tomb, but Vash herself would slip out from her grasp. Strange murmuring behind a door betrays Illidan's presence, and upon breaking it down, Maiev confronts him, accompanied by Lady Vash. When Illidan drank in Gul'dan's power, he gained the warlock's memories, including those of the tomb of Sargeras. The power Gul'dan truly coveted lies deeper within, but the Eye of Sargeras is all Illidan needs from this cursed place. Using the Eye's power, Illidan begins to collapse the chamber, intending on sealing Maiev beneath the earth as she did to him for 10,000 years. Without any other choice, Maiev blinks through the rocks, leaving behind Naisha and her fellow wardens. The tomb's inhabitants have awoken from the shaking, and Maiev nimbly dodges through them as she flees from the tomb. Sections of the tomb would collapse, threatening to seal Maiev within, but she would escape from the ruins and with haste make her way back to her encampment. When Maiev returns to her base, she finds they are surrounded by the Naga. Their own force is too large to attempt to escape stealthily, so their only hope is to send out a runner to contact Malfurion and request reinforcements. The runner will need protection, and when Maiev and a small force move to follow her, the path behind them is sealed. The Naga and Murlocs have been excavating the nearby area, and a few of the artifacts they have unearthed prove rather useful. A special orb allows Maiev to quickly teleport between her base and the escort, allowing her to back up both groups. As her base defends itself from the Naga, the escort moves through the shallow waters, finding a few abandoned ships to carry them forwards. The Naga have blocked the waters leading out to sea, and so on foot, Maiev and the escort break down the barricades and clear out any other hostile forces, allowing the runner to make it to sea. With luck, she will reach Malfurion Stormrage and bring back their desperately needed reinforcements. Back in Kalimdor, Malfurion and Tyrande look over the forests of Mount Hyjal. Although the great tree's roots are healing, the nearby forests of Fellwood are still tainted by the Legion's corruption. As the two of them discuss how best to handle the situation, Maiev's runner arrives, escorted by one of the druids. Although Malfurion is furious at the mention of Illidan, the runner informs him and Tyrande that Maiev pledged herself to recapturing him, but that Illidan has claimed a dark and demonic power from the tomb of Sargeras. Now, Maiev's forces are holding him back on the Broken Isles, but they require immediate reinforcements. Tyrande offers to lead the Sentinels to the Broken Isles, stating that since she was the one who released Illidan, he is her responsibility to deal with. Malfurion initially attempts to dismiss her, claiming him and the druid can handle the situation, but instead decides the two of them should go together. If the situation is as dire as the runner suggests, Maiev will need all the help she can get. Although Malfurion and Tyrande safely arrive at the Broken Isles, not all of their forces arrive together. Some of them have run aground around the island, but there isn't enough time to find them. Maiev's base is under a constant barrage of attacks by the Naga, and if they cannot reach her soon, her base will be quickly overwhelmed. Tyrande and Malfurion quickly navigate their way through the area, encountering the strange serpentine Naga, and fending off the hostile wildlife. Standing between them and Maiev is a large Naga base, and although their meager forces were outnumbered, Malfurion and Tyrande would break through them. Maiev is relieved to see Malfurion, but shows hostility to Tyrande. It was the High Priestess that released Illidan in the first place and killed her wardens guarding him. Malfurion steps between the two, breaking up the argument. They can put aside their conflict until after Illidan has been captured. Illidan is still somewhere on the island, hiding among his Naga. Rounding up the remaining ships, Malfurion rescues the special allies from Ashenvale he brought over. The mountain giants were awoken when the Legion returned, and now they've agreed to aid the Night Elves. As they assault Illidan's base, Tyrande runs into the betrayer. She states it was a mistake to set him free, and his pursuit of raw power over true wisdom is why she chose to be with Malfurion over him. Illidan claims she is blind to what he is doing, and that they share a common enemy. As he runs off, Tyrande chases after him. As she corners him, she is captured by the Naga. Illidan steps out from the shadows, but before he can intervene, Malfurion and Maiev arrive, having finished dismantling the base. Illidan flees as Malfurion and Maiev deal with his guards, but by the time they reach the shore, Illidan has already escaped. Maiev, Malfurion, and Tyrande arrive at the shores of Lordaeron. The land itself has suffered terribly from the effects of the Scourge, and Malfurion leaves to go and commune with the forests, reminding Tyrande and Maiev to focus on their mission instead of their personal disagreements. Moving inland, the two of them come across a band of High Elves led by their prince, Kael'thas Sunstrider. Although Kael'thas hasn't seen any demons around, something has been riling up the undead, making the journey of his caravan much more dangerous. Maiev and Tyrande agree to help escort the caravan, on the condition Kael'thas agrees to help them hunt down Illidan in return. Maiev is reluctant to aid them, but Tyrande reminds her that the Alliance helped them fight off the Legion, and so this is the least they can do. The caravan leaves their post and heads down the road towards the river Aravas, watching carefully for the undead that haunt the lands of Silverpine Forest. The elven caravan holds what meager forces Kael'thas could get together, and along the journey he tells Maiev and Tyrande that the Scourge nearly wiped out his race. His once proud people have renamed themselves to the Sin'dorei, or Blood Elves, in honor of their fallen brethren. The undead harass the caravan every step of the way, and the combined elven forces hire the assistance of mercenaries to bolster their numbers. A split in the road slows them down, forcing them to choose between a longer route or a shorter one that takes them near a Scourge base, but down either path lies Pyrewood Village. The village turns out to be a trap, as the undead burst out of the nearby houses and attack the caravan. As they retreat over the river, Tyrande holds off the undead, but the bridge collapses and pulls her downriver towards the heart of undead lands. Maiev convinces Kael'thas not to stage a rescue mission, instead holding him to his agreement to help her find Illidan. Lordaeron has suffered just as much as the forests of Ashenvale, if not more. The blight over the area has killed countless acres of woodland, and the land cries out in pain. As Malfurion communes with the land, he feels a crippling pain course through his body, and he calls out for the spirits of the wilds to show him what this pain is. Wisps appear from the trees and surround Malfurion, granting him a vision of the frozen roof of the world. Northrend is splitting asunder, and the world cries out in pain. Malfurion pleads with the spirits to show him the cause of this destruction, and the scene shifts to an image of Dalaran. There, Illidan's forces are channeling their energies into the Eye of Sargeras. Soon, the enemies of Illidan's new master will be swept away, and he will claim his reward. Furious, Malfurion hurries off to find Maiev and Tyrande to warn them of Illidan's plans. Malfurion finds Maiev and her forces, but Tyrande's absence gives him pause. According to Maiev, she fell during their escort of the Blood Elves, torn apart by the undead before their very eyes. Malfurion is racked with grief, but Maiev channels his sorrow towards hunting Illidan. Illidan is the reason they are here, and it is his fault Tyrande is now dead. She introduces Malfurion to Kael'thas, who has agreed to help them capture the betrayer. They have set themselves up just across a river from the ruins of Dalaran, where the Naga have firmly established themselves, and are conducting the ritual. Their forces are pressed to move quickly before Illidan finishes his destruction of Northrend. The combined elven forces march into Dalaran, laying waste to the Naga within. The sea witches performing the ritual itself are shielded by an ethereal magic, but the fairy dragons turn the magic back upon them, putting an end to their vile schemes. As the Eye of Sargeras breaks apart in the aftermath of the spell's failure, Maiev, Malfurion, and Kael'thas confront Illidan. For endangering the balance of the world, imprisonment will not suffice this time, and Malfurion sentences him to death. Maiev gleefully offers to carry out the sentence herself. Illidan cries out that the spell was meant to destroy the Lich King and put an end to the Scourge threat. Their enemies are one and the same, but Malfurion asks at what cost, and spits back that because of him, Tyrande is dead. Confused, Kael'thas steps in that Tyrande may not be dead and may just be somewhere downriver. Malfurion turns his ire towards Maiev, furious that she lied to him. Illidan offers to help find her, as no matter their differences, he would never wish for her to come to harm. Maiev protests that they could never side with the betrayer, but Malfurion encases her in magical vines to hold her in place. He would deal with her once Tyrande was safe, and the two brothers followed Kael'thas to the river. Illidan's Naga scouted the river and found where her and her forces defend themselves against the undead. Malfurion moves to go rescue her, but Illidan offers his Naga instead. It would be faster to travel down the river directly, and the Scourge's aerial forces prevent approaching from the skies. Although Malfurion risks much by trusting Illidan, he believes his brother truly wishes for Tyrande's safety. Illidan and his Naga break down a nearby troll dam and assault the Scourge base from behind, burning it to the ground. Rushing to Tyrande ahead of the roaming undead, Illidan opens a portal for the two of them to escape through. At first, Tyrande accuses Illidan of setting a trap to finish her off, but Illidan convinces her to step through the portal to safety. Reunited with Malfurion, Tyrande thanks Illidan, and he confesses that for all the strife between the two brothers, and the years of hatred Illidan felt in his heart for Malfurion, he has grown tired of their conflict. From that day forward, there would be peace between them. The suffering Illidan brought to the world cannot be forgiven, but for saving Tyrande, Malfurion will let him walk away. Illidan never sought to rule the world, but instead he only ever desired power. By siding with Malfurion, Illidan has angered his new master, and so he takes his leave through an open portal. He bids farewell to Tyrande, telling her that the two of them will never see each other again. As he vanishes through the portal, Maiev arrives, chastising Malfurion and Tyrande for letting Illidan escape. Tyrande's pleas fall on deaf ears, and Maiev and her wardens run through the portal to lands unknown, and Malfurion eases Tyrande's mind. Maiev has lost herself to the hunt, and they can only pray she does not cause more harm than Illidan. As the portal closes, Malfurion and Tyrande turn away to head back home. It has been a long year since the Legion first arrived in Kalimdor, and the two of them have earned their rest. On the outskirts of Dalaran, Kael'thas and the Blood Elves arrive at the encampment of Lord Garithos. Although the prince attempts to explain why he and his forces are late, Garithos dismisses his wild stories and turns his attention to the mission at hand. A large Scourge force is approaching Dalaran from the south, while a smaller detachment has set themselves up in the eastern mountains. Garithos will be leading the soldiers south to fight against the undead, and while Kael is ready to mobilize his forces to fight alongside them, Garithos has other plans in mind for the Blood Elves. 3 observatories lay nearby, and Garithos ordered Kael'thas to remain behind and repair the observatories, keeping an eye on the Scourge to the east. Brushing aside Kael's protests, Garithos reminds him that the elves serve the Alliance, which means they follow his orders down to the letter. As humiliating a task as it might be, Kael's warriors are forced to repair the observatory and fight their way through the ruins of Dalaran, clearing out the mad wizards, crumbling golems, and remaining Legion forces that have claimed the fallen city. Arriving at the shores of the nearby lake, the undead have already burned down the shipyards, preventing passage to the other observatories. As Kael curses the situation, Lady Vosh emerges from the waters, greeting the young prince. Her and her Naga have come in peace, bringing along a few transport ships as a gesture of goodwill. Their kind shares a common ancestry, and now both share an enemy against the Scourge. Kael accepts the ships and establishes himself on the nearby island, repairing the observatory station there. The final observatory lies on the other side of the lake to the north, and once it has been repaired, him and his forces monitor the situation to the east. Lord Garithos arrives at their base, unhappy with Kael'thas. He had received disturbing news the Blood Elves accepted help from the Naga, and despite Kael reassuring him that the Naga are not a threat, Garithos asserts that they are inhuman and must be crushed. Warning Kael'thas to watch where his loyalties lie, he leads his men back down to the south. An emissary from Garithos brings new orders to Kael. The undead are amassing nearby, and Garithos has ordered the Blood Elves to wipe them out. At the same time, he has ordered all foot soldiers, cavalry, and support teams down to the south, leaving Kael'thas with few forces remaining. As the emissary leaves, he snidely tells Kael that Garithos has confidence in the elves' creativity to deal with the undead. Without any supporting forces, the undead attack the outlying bases, wiping them out one after another. Soon, all that remains is the central base positioned on the island, leaving the elves completely surrounded by the undead. Lady Vosh and her Naga emerge from the waters, pledging themselves to fight alongside Kael against the undead. Kael initially tries to send Vosh away, not wanting to risk Garithos' ire any further, but Vosh points out that Garithos isn't here fighting the undead with him. Reluctantly, and with little other options, Kael'thas accepts Vosh's offer for aid. The first order of business would be to gain a foothold on the mainland, and with Vosh's help, Kael manages to destroy one of the Scourge bases and establish an encampment. From there, Kael and Vosh would push their way towards the heart of the undead base, and burning it to the ground. With the battle won, Kael confides in Vosh that he may have doomed his people accepting their help. Vosh comments that Garithos trusts no race other than his own, and that perhaps it is time to separate his people from the Alliance. Kael mentions a festering hunger that has begun to claim his people, and to his horror, Vosh informs him that just like her people, the Blood Elves are addicted to magic. Without the Sunwell to feed them, they will be consumed by their hunger unless they find a new source. Their conversation is cut short by the arrival of Garithos. As the Naga flee, they are spotted by Garithos, who decides to instead confront the Blood Elves. He never believed they should have been allowed to join the Alliance, and now that he has caught them siding with monsters, he has the perfect excuse he needs to execute every last one of them. The Dalaran sewers have been converted into dungeons, and the cells once used to keep the Kirin experiments from getting loose are perfect for keeping the Blood Elves imprisoned. Left to rot in there, the elves would succumb to their addiction, were it not that they were set to be executed the following morning. As Kael considers his fate, he is released by Lady Vosh. The portal Kel'Thuzad once opened still lies in the city above, and if Kael and Vosh can rescue the other Blood Elves, they can escape to the other side, where Illidan awaits them. They seek out Kael's lieutenants as they work on freeing others imprisoned, while Kael fights through Garithos' guards towards the exit, and lays to rest the ghosts of the slain Archmagi still haunting the city. The guards would release some of the more aggressive experiments still caged down in the sewers in an attempt to slow them down, but Kael and Vosh would continue to make their way to the exit. Jailer Kassan, who once served the Kirin Tor, barred the way, along with teams of soldiers and knights, and once he has been dealt with, Kael begins his preparations to move his people to safety. The portal is opened once more, and the elven engineers who once helped to build Dalaran's defenses set to work in constructing enchanted towers to protect those attempting to flee through it. Garithos would receive word that the elves were attempting to escape, and rallied his forces to focus on nothing but the portal's destruction. This mission is a unique one, hidden through a puzzle in the previous mission. Rather than the typical Warcraft gameplay, this mission is set up as a tower defense, and surviving through all 30 waves yields a reward for the next mission, in the form of a Pandaren Brewmaster as an additional controllable hero. Once the last of his citizens has escaped through the portal, Kael calls for his defenders to retreat. As Kael'thas and Vashj stand at the threshold, Vashj promises Kael that the two of them would be taking their final steps towards their destiny. As they slip through the portal, it closes behind them, preventing anyone from following after. On the other side of the portal was a scarred and broken land. The crimson soil was dry and cracked, and large portions of the earth was blown apart, hovering in the air. This desolate waste is all that remains of the Orcish homeworld of Draenor, now called Outland by its inhabitants. Many years ago, after the Second War, Ner'zhul stole a number of powerful artifacts and opened numerous portals across the planet. An Alliance expedition led by Khadgar chased them through the Dark Portal into Draenor, where they nearly wiped out the Orcs for good, but when Ner'zhul completed his ritual atop the Black Temple, the powerful energies would tear the planet apart. Now, the ruins of the planet drifted through the twisting nether, where the fell energies only fueled the slow corruption of what remained. Somewhere in the wastes, Illidan was waiting for them, and Kael was eager to seek him out. If the demon could find a way to cure his people of their magical addiction, then he would gladly pledge his loyalty to Illidan's service. Even after 3 days of travel, there are no signs of life to be found, but as the wind shifts, Vashj catches a familiar scent. A Night Elf stronghold has been established nearby, and they appear to belong to the Warden Maev's forces. After following Illidan through the portal, Maiev would not stop in her hunt for the betrayer, and at last she has finally captured him. The Wardens are escorting him back to their stronghold, and if they manage to bring him within its walls, then Kael and Vashj will have no chance of rescuing him. They would meet the Night Elves in combat, and after sending Maiev retreating back to her base, the two of them would escort Illidan's cage back to their own base. Maiev would rally more troops to her side, striking out again and again to try and retake Illidan, but the combined forces of the Blood Elves and Naga kept her at bay. When at last Illidan is safe within their own base, Vashj frees him and introduces him to Kael'thas Sunstrider. The Blood Elves are the last mortal descendants of the Highborn that served Illidan before the War of the Ancients, who sailed to the Eastern Kingdoms to found their own great civilization. Kael'thas tells of his people's plight to Illidan, who shares the young prince's curse. He too feels a hunger for magic, but regretfully he informs Kael there is no cure for their addiction. There are, however, ways to feed it, and if the Blood Elves stay by his side, then Illidan promises them more power to feast upon than they could possibly imagine. Illidan makes Kael his right hand alongside Lady Vashj, and the three of them begin planning their next steps. Months after the Legion's defeat, Illidan was visited by the great demon lord Kil'jaeden within Ashenvale Forest. By consuming the powers of the Skull of Gul'dan and slaying Tichondrius, he ensured the Legion's defeat at the Battle of Mount Hyjal. Now, Kil'jaeden offers him a second chance. The Lich King has broken free of the Legion, and if Illidan can succeed in destroying Ner'zhul, still trapped in the ice of Northrend, Kil'jaeden will grant his heart's desire. His first attempt using the Eye of Sargeras failed, and so he fled to Outland to hide from Kil'jaeden. Now, if they wish to remain, Kil'jaeden's agents must be cleansed from the land. After Draenor was destroyed, the Pit Lord Magtheridon rallied the remaining Orcs and seized control of Outland. By using the portals Ner'zhul once opened, his demonic hordes have grown stronger. Illidan intends on closing them himself to cut off Magtheridon's reinforcements before moving on to the Black Citadel. The Orcs would attempt to destroy Illidan's base, along with a village not far to the south. The alien race of the Draenei still calls Outland home, even after most of them were driven off the planet years ago. The Orcs' attempts to drive off the Broken Tongue tribe have proven fruitless, and with Illidan's help, the Draenei push back against the Orcs and reclaim the surrounding land. The Elder Sage Akama agrees to fight alongside Illidan and reclaim the Black Citadel, which was once a sacred temple of his people before the Orcs nearly drove them to extinction. With the aid of the Draenei, Illidan, Vashj, and Kael cut their way through the demons guarding the various gateways and permanently seal them. Although Magtheridon is cut off from reinforcements, the Black Citadel will still be heavily defended. Magtheridon has grown complacent over the years as he has had no real threats he has needed to deal with. His raw strength and sheer numbers will be no match for Illidan's cunning. As Vashj sneaks her forces in through the sewers, Illidan and Kael'thas break through the main gates with the assistance of Akama. The most powerful of the temple's defenses are powered by special crystals, but Akama's people can walk undetected in the shadows, allowing them to slip by and disable them. With each guard that falls, Illidan draws closer to two of Magtheridon's trusted generals. the Master of Pain and Mistress of Torment hold the keys to the temple's summit where Magtheridon awaits. He would prove no match against Illidan's power, and his combined forces would break Magtheridon into submission. The Pit Lord was a relic of a fallen age, and Illidan shall replace him as the true Lord of Outland. From atop the temple, he addresses all who are in attendance, declaring that his supreme rule cannot be challenged, and now all of Outland would serve him. As Illidan, Vosh, and Kael celebrate their victory, an odd storm approaches the temple. As it draws closer, Vosh warns Kael to keep his head down, as the monstrous form of Kil'jaeden appears before the trio. The demon hunter failed to destroy the frozen throne as commanded, and now he tries to hide from Kil'jaeden's wrath in this barren hellscape. Illidan promises that his plans were merely set back, and that he had come to this world in an attempt to bolster his forces and come up with a new plan. As Kil'jaeden looks over the Naga and the Blood Elves, he decides that perhaps Illidan's new allies do show some amount of potential, and agrees to give Illidan one final chance. As Kil'jaeden leaves, Illidan turns to Vosh and Kael. Hiding on Outland may not have been the wisest decision, but now the quest lies before them. Both Vosh and Kael swear their loyalty to Illidan, agreeing to follow him into the cold heart of death itself. It has been many months since Detheroc, Balnazar, and Varimathras have heard from Archimonde. They continue to watch over Lordaeron, ready to mobilize at a moment's notice, but the longer they remain in control, the further they run the scourge into the ground. Their thoughts are interrupted by the return of Prince Arthas, who thanks the Dreadlords for taking care of his kingdom, but he no longer requires their services. The three of them flee from the prince, and Kel'Thuzad and Sylvanas welcome Arthas back home. Arthas declares himself as the new king of Lordaeron, and his first act will be to scour the remaining humans from its lands. However, they have begun to abandon their villages and flee into the mountains, where it will be impossible to hunt them all down should they escape. Arthas divides up his forces between himself, Kel'Thuzad, and Sylvanas, and the three of them block the roads and begin their slaughter. The three forces move through the countryside, slaughtering what remains of Lordaeron's living population. They are being defended by the remnants of the Silver Hand, who are positioned nearby, and Arthas calls for their extermination. Midway through their hunt, Arthas is crippled by a searing pain, and the voice of the Lich King speaks to him, warning him of an encroaching danger. Though his powers are diminished, Arthas is insistent that they finish the hunt before they investigate this mystery. The remaining hunters would be slaughtered, and the Silver Hand's haven would be crushed with ease. Yet Arthas would feel the crippling pain again, and this time the Lich King commanded that Arthas return to Northrend immediately. Kel'Thuzad would rush to Arthas' aid, and the new king would lean on the Lich's help and return to the capital to prepare for a long journey ahead of him. The following evening, Sylvanas meets with the three Dreadlords. Free of the Lich King's voice in her head, she was approached by them to discuss the latest developments regarding King Arthas. As it turns out, the Lich King is losing his power, and as it continues to wane, so too does his control over the Scourge. Frostmourne still holds powerful enchantments, but it is only a matter of time until Arthas' powers too will fade. Kel'Thuzad is too loyal to betray Arthas, but with her will now her own, Sylvanas wishes for revenge. She agrees to aid the Dreadlord's coup, but will assist in her own way. Balnazar remains distrustful of Sylvanas, as her elven heart would never agree to side with them, but Varimathras quells his fears. Sylvanas' hatred for Arthas will be a useful tool for turning her into their pawn, and with the three of them in agreement, they begin to plot their coup. Arthas is having a difficult time even commanding his own warriors, and if he does not reach Northrend soon, all will be lost. All of the preparations have been made, but as Arthas and Kel'Thuzad attempt to leave the city, they are confronted by the Dreadlords. They have assumed control of the majority of the Scourge and spring their trap to kill Arthas. Kel'Thuzad, cut off from his king, urges Arthas to flee into the wilderness, where the two of them will reconvene. Taking control of whatever forces he can, Arthas begins to make his way through the burning streets of the city, fighting against his own Scourge that have been turned against him, and the demonic forces that remain in Lordaeron under the Dreadlord's control. As they leave the city, they find more of the Dreadlord's forces laying in wait, but are rescued by a group of banshees. They have been sent by Sylvanas to escort Arthas across the river to safety, where she will meet with them in the forests. The banshees lead Arthas into a clearing where another vision from the Lich King warns him that he has been deceived. His forces fall as a poisoned arrow pierces his armor, and Sylvanas reveals herself. The paralytic effects were crafted just for him, and now Sylvanas intends to make Arthas suffer just as much as he made her suffer. Her vengeance would be denied with the arrival of Kel'Thuzad, who slays the Banshee escort and drives Sylvanas into the trees. As she flees, she promises that she will never stop hunting him. Kel'Thuzad's forces would bring Arthas to the safety of the shoreline, where the arrow's paralysis would slowly work its way out of his system. The ships for the journey have all been prepared, and Arthas thanks the Lich, confessing that he has been a dear friend. The future is uncertain, and Arthas is not sure he will ever return, and so he asks Kel'Thuzad to watch over his kingdom and ensure his legacy will live on. As Kel'Thuzad makes his promise, Arthas boards the ship and sets sail for Northrend. Only days ago was Sylvanas a slave to the Lich King, but now she and her sisters are free, yet they are still cursed to undeath. Her thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Varimathras, who has come to invite her into their new order. Sylvanas refuses the offer, unwilling to give up her newfound freedom so easily. Varimathras would retreat to his base and launch a number of assaults against Sylvanas, but she would not prove to be easy prey. Her banshees were capable of possession, and by converting the ogres to the northwest and the bandits to the northeast, Sylvanas grew her own forces and launched an attack on Varimathras. As she confronts the Dreadlord, Varimathras begs for Sylvanas to spare his life. He is aware of Deathrok and Balnazar's plans and where their forces are stationed, and intends to betray them and serve Sylvanas to spare his own life. Intrigued, Sylvanas agrees to let him prove his loyalty, but warns that he will be kept on a very short leash. Arthas set foot on Northrend once again, feeling as though a lifetime had passed since last he had been here. Something was threatening the Lich King, and it would not take long to figure out what it was. Dragonhawk riders would approach Arthas, introducing themselves as the Blood Elves, but would be driven off by a great beetle-like creature. This creature is a Nubarak and was sent by the Lich King to help Arthas reach the Frozen Throne. Together, the two of them destroy the nearby Blood Elf base to make use of their resources, and there, Kael'thas reveals himself. He informs Arthas that this was merely a scouting force, and that Illidan's army is far more vast. Even now, they march upon the glacier, and the Death Knight will never reach his king in time. Anubarak, however, was once the king of the ancient empire of Ajal Narub, and knows the underground passageways will grant them a direct passage to the Frozen Throne. A darkness has settled over the tunnels, but it is their only way to reach the glacier before Illidan. Fighting through Vash's Naga, Anubarak leads Arthas up to the gates of the Fallen Kingdom. Varimathras has led Sylvanas straight to Deathrok's base, where a human encampment is established nearby. As it turns out, Lord Garithos had fallen under the spell of Deathrok quite some time ago, and he has been using him and his forces as pawns. Their forces were too great, but by possessing one of the nearby patrols, Sylvanas opened the gates to their base and launched a surprise attack to catch them off guard. It would not be long before they realized what was going on, but by then Sylvanas had already established her base and began to reinforce her warriors. Striking against the humans, while it brought personal satisfaction, was not the primary goal. Instead, Sylvanas' forces were aimed directly at Deathrok. When Deathrok fell, his hold over Garithos was broken and the humans turned against the undead. He turned his blade towards Sylvanas, believing them to be a part of the Scourge, but she convinced him that she was free and her only desire was vengeance. They shared a common enemy in Balnazar, who was currently occupying the capital, and thus Garithos reluctantly agreed to an alliance. Capital City would not fall easily. It had held strong against the Horde years earlier, and now in Balnazar's hands, Varimathras reasons only a battle of attrition will squeeze the Dreadlord out. But Sylvanas opts for a more aggressive strategy. While Garithos assaulted the city from behind, Sylvanas would approach from the front. Between the two of their armies, they would breach through the city's walls and dismantle Balnazar's defenses. The Dreadlord himself would curse Varimathras for siding with Sylvanas, but it had become clear the Legion was on the losing side. As a test of his loyalty, Sylvanas orders Varimathras to kill Balnazar, which Varimathras protests. It is forbidden for a Nathrazim to kill another, but to prove himself, Varimathras carried out the order. Satisfied, Garithos orders them all out of his city, to which Varimathras gleefully ends his life. Capital City and the surrounding lands that were once Lordaeron are now under Sylvanas' control, and free of the Scourge, she proclaims that those that follow her shall be known as the Forsaken. As Arthas and Anubarak approach the entrance to Ajal Narub, there are no Nerubians to be found, undead or otherwise. Instead, the two of them are met with Myrddin's dwarves, now led by Baelgun. They claimed the ancient tunnels as their own in order to survive, and despite attempting to seal the doors, the Scourge breaks their way in. Arthas would not make it far as the dwarves blow up the bridge leading further in, although Anubarak assures him there are other passageways within the maze-like tunnels. These tunnels hold living Nerubians who remain hostile to the undead, as well as storerooms of gold and treasures. The dwarves attempt to fend off the undead, but their own explosives would be used against them. Finding Baelgun, the dwarf warns them that the recent quakes awoke ancient horrors beneath the ice, which the dwarves have sworn to keep imprisoned. Stripping the blood key off his corpse, Arthas opens the doors to the caverns leading deeper still. Assuming Baelgun's words were true, there is no telling what will await them in the heart of the old Nerubian Empire. Down in the Old Kingdom, more living Nerubians halt their path, calling for the death of the traitor king. Although Arthas is initially confused, Anubarak corrects his assumption. When the Lich King first arrived in Northrend and created the Scourge war machine, the Nerubians resisted him. Seeing them as a threat, the Nerubians launched an attack against the Lich King and kicked off the War of the Spider. The Nerubians were resistant to the Scourge's plagues and magics, and by utilizing guerrilla tactics, they quickly gained the upper hand. When the Lich King launched a massive invasion against Ajal Nerub itself, the Nerubians were pushed back into their kingdom. Attempting to tunnel their way out, they unearthed a dark and terrible ancient evil. Fighting a war on two fronts, many of the Nerubians, including the great king Anubarak, fell and were raised into the Scourge's army. The faceless ones that were awoken still haunt the old passageways, and a twisted, forgotten one lies along the path through the tunnels. As more faceless ones flood into the chamber, Arthas and Anubarak are forced to flee into the Upper Kingdom. The exit to the Upper Kingdom will bring Arthas and Anubarak to the base of Icecrown Glacier, but so close to their goal they cannot afford to let down their guards. The way is still lined with hidden traps, but as they attempt to make their way forward, another quake causes the chamber to collapse. Separated from his forces, Arthas is forced to make the rest of the journey alone and hope Anubarak made it out. Maneuvering through fire and moving platforms, Arthas races against time as the rest of the tunnels threaten to collapse on top of him. More faceless ones lie along the path, slowing him down, but at the far end, across a pool of water, Anubarak breaks through the rubble and the two are reunited. Anubarak congratulates Arthas, seeing why the Lich King chose him, as few could have made it through alive. With little time remaining, they rush towards the exit, finding a large group of faceless ones blocking it, led by a larger horror. With no choice, Arthas fights his way through the horde and reaches the safety of the kingdom's exit, welcoming the sunlight once again. Arthas and Anubarak arrive at the base of the glacier, finding that their forces are already assembled. As they approach, they are welcomed by the necromancers and informed that Illidan's forces have already entrenched themselves around the area. But as Arthas tries to listen, another headache grips him. The Lich King calls out to him, sensing his champion down below. In truth, the reason why their powers are diminishing is the Lich King's energies are leaking out through a fracture in his prison. Frostmourne was once bound within the ice with the Lich King, but Ner'zhul thrust it out and sent it on its journey to find Arthas and guide him to his destiny, to the Lich King. Now, Kil'jaeden's agents close in around him, and if they reach the Frozen Throne before Arthas, then the Scourge will be lost forever. Granting Arthas what remaining power he can spare, the Lich King awaits at the top of the glacier. Looking out across his vast army, Arthas now realizes what must be done and vows to finish this once and for all. The throne's chamber lies at the heart of the frozen valley, its entrance sealed by 4 enchanted obelisks. Around 2 of them, Illidan's forces have established their fortifications, and it would not take long before Illidan, Kael, and Vosh move to claim the other 2. If Arthas hopes to gain access, he will need to activate the 4 of them himself. As Arthas' forces move between the obelisks, they are forced to defend him while the obelisks are activated, and establish defenses of their own to fend off against Illidan's incursions. The 2 would come to blows, fighting against one another for control of the obelisks, with Illidan taunting Arthas that the Scourge will meet its end, and Arthas vowing to put the fear of death back into him. Ultimately, Arthas would claim all 4 obelisks and the door to the chamber would be opened. Still, Illidan bars the way, standing before its gates. Arthas tells Illidan to leave this world and never return, but having sworn to destroy the Frozen Throne, Illidan cannot simply stand aside. Without any other recourse, the 2 of them would be forced to fight against one another one final time. Arthas and Illidan would confront each other in single combat. When last their blades had clashed, all that time ago in Ashenvale Forest, the 2 of them had been of equal strength. But that encounter was just a distant memory now, and both of them would fight until their last breath. The fight would be tense, with each side never gaining a true upper hand over the other, all while calling upon every power they had accumulated. The decisive blow would be struck by Arthas, managing to get a lucky hit against Illidan and striking a blow across his chest. Rather than finishing the demon hunter off, Arthas turned his attention to the frozen throne, leaving Illidan to bleed out onto the snow. He would be rescued by Vosh and Kael'thas and taken back to the Black Temple to lick his wounds. There, Illidan would build his army and rule over Outland with an iron fist, fearful of the day Kil'jaeden returned. The scar left behind by Frostmourn's sting would never cease its painful bite, and Illidan would remember their encounter until the end of his days. Ascending the stairs up to the frozen throne, the ghosts of the past echo through Arthas' mind. Uther, Muradin, Medivh, and even his own words haunted him, but the loudest voice would whisper to him as he reached the summit. The Lich King called out for Arthas to return the blade and release him from his prison, and with a cry, Arthas struck Frostmourne against the ice. As the Lich King's armor fell to the ground, the surrounding shell of ice falling away, Arthas would pick up the helmet and place it upon his own head. In that instant, his soul would bond with Ner'zhul, and the two of them became one. For many years, Rexxar has hidden himself away in the wilds, watching as the other races fought between each other. As he watches on, an Orc runner is ambushed by a pack of Quillbore, and despite Rexxar's help, Moghrin falls. He had been delivering a letter to his war chief Thrall, and Rexxar honors Moghrin's dying wish to deliver it. Following the demonic invasion of Mount Hyjal, Thrall led the Orcs to the rugged coasts and founded the nation of Durotar, named after his father. There, Rexxar finds the Orcs constructing their new city of Orgrimmar, named in honor of Thrall's former mentor. Rexxar delivers the message and introduces himself as the last of the clan of Mok Nathal. Back on Draenor, the Mok Nathal were born of half Orc and half Ogre, and as Orgrimmar was built for all Orcs to call home, Thrall offers Rexxar a place within its walls. Rexxar insists he earn his place among them, and Thrall points out there may be some around the city that could use his help. With the aid of his bear Misha and one of Thrall's best scouts, Rokan of the Darkspear, Rexxar begins to explore around the city. The first one that Rexxar finds is the chief engineer, a goblin by the name of Gazlo. His men are digging under the city to look for an underground spring and accidentally dug into a kobold nest. Finding the tunnels, Rexxar assists the goblins with destroying the support beams to collapse the nest on top of the kobolds, though the goblins are blown apart in the process. The shaman Drekthar has been attempting to brew a special potion to aid their warriors in battle, but the required shimmerweed only grows in Thunder Ridge, where the thunder lizards have been growing aggressive as of late. Something has been riling them up, and after retrieving 6 bushels of the herb, Drekthar promises he will go to investigate. Finally, the captain of the security forces, Nazgrel, sends Rexxar to deal with the harpies that have been raiding their supply caravans for a few weeks now. Locating their lair and putting each of them in the ground, Rexxar returns to Nazgrel triumphant. In exchange for his help, Nazgrel sends Rexxar off to the armory to requisition a free piece of gear. To the east of Orgrimmar, Rexxar stumbles upon a dying shaman named Morg Wolfsong, surrounded by the corpses of his slain brethren. They had been attacked by a group of orcs that still worshipped the Burning Legion and ran off with one of the shaman's artifacts. Tracking them down through a canyon full of thorny brambles, Rexxar and Rokan dispatch of the cult and bring the artifact back to Wolfsong. Grateful that the spirits of his fallen brothers have been avenged, the shaman leaves the relic in Rexxar's hands and passes on. Another strange encounter to the north is a Pandaran brewmaster looking to collect ingredients for his masterpiece. Rexxar agrees to help him, collecting a Thunderbloom bulb from the nearby Murloc camp, the egg of a powerful Thunder Phoenix, and purchasing a keg of Thunder Water from a local market. The brew turns out rather terrible in the end, but it leaves the brewmaster, Chen Stormstout, eager to keep searching this land for other ingredients to help refine it. Rexar readily agrees to let Chen join him and Rokan, and the three of them head back towards Orgrimmar. Nazgrel had reported to Thrall about humans encroaching on their lands, and distrustful of them, he suggests sending a group out to survey the area. Thrall agrees, sending Rexar to meet with Garthok at the northeastern outpost. Garthok hasn't seen any activity, but does mention a nearby observatory, although the local Quillboar have been growing aggressive and may bar the way. Going through the Beast Den to not only reach the observatory, but also deal with the Quillboar menace, Rexar fights the Boarmen worshipping the bones of a primitive god. The wild god Agamagon was the progenitor of their race, but the Great Boar was killed 10,000 years ago during the War of the Ancients. It is said where his blood fell, great thorny vines grew wild and untamable, with the Quillboar settling under their shelter as homes. At last, reaching the observatory, Rexar spies through the telescope at the eastern shores, seeing a large fleet of human ships making landfall. As it turns out, the humans led by Jaina Proudmoore settled just to the south, but now it appeared as though they were making their move on Orcish territory. Drekthar was seen heading to Thunder Ridge to investigate the Thunder Lizards, and so Rexar's party seeks him out to offer their aid. The Thunder Lizards typically remain within the canyon, but something has been making them aggressive and driving them out. As they begin their investigation, they quickly spot a human lumber mill that has been chopping down the forest in the area. Although Rexar is ready to tear it down, Drekthar holds him back. After the Battle of Mount Hyjal, Thrall and Jaina agreed to a pact of non-aggression between their two nations, and attacking the mill could lead to open war. The humans would need to be dealt with later, and instead the Thunder Lizards would need to be put down to prevent them from threatening Orgrimmar citizens. Along the way, Drekthar collects a number of their eggs to study their ecology, hoping to find a way to prevent something like this from happening in the future. Cursing the needless waste of life, Rexar and his companions complete their grim work before turning to more important matters. Regardless of the non-aggression pact, Thrall cannot allow Jaina to move her troops onto his borders, and orders Nazgrel to accompany Rexar's party back to the outpost to monitor the situation. When they arrive, they find the outpost razed to the ground, and move to attack the human camp along the coast. Finding their camp, Rexar notices a strange emblem of an anchor emblazoned on their armor, and makes note of it as they burn down their tents and slaughter every last soldier. Thrall is disheartened to hear the news of their presence, although he is puzzled by the emblem they wear, finding it somewhat familiar. Rokan points out that if the humans are approaching by the sea, then his people's village on the Echo Isles could be in danger. Taking a goblin zeppelin, Rexar, Rokan, and Chen make their way to the Echo Isles to meet with the new leader of the Darkspear tribe, Vol'jin, to assess the situation. When they meet with Vol'jin, the Darkspear village is already under attack by the human fleets. The battleships will need to be destroyed before the trolls can begin to evacuate to the mainland, but without any flying mounts, Rexar and his companions will be useless on land. Luckily, Vol'jin transforms the trio into spirit wyverns and lends the aid of his bat riders armed with explosives. Moving between the islands, Rexar destroys the ships attacking the trolls' homes and sends the large battle cruisers to the bottom of the sea. With them cleared, the outer villages will need to be signaled to evacuate, and setting fire to a number of pyres will alert them to head to the mainland. Unfortunately, the island the pyres are located on have become a home for a group of sea giants, which will need to be dealt with. The giants and aquatic fauna prove to be difficult, but with the threat of the remaining human fleets reinforcing their invasion, Rexar presses on and lights the signal pyres. The trolls that manage to escape would regroup just a little ways to the south, where they will be safer under the Horde's protection. Having had enough of this farce, Thrall wishes an audience with Jaina, and luckily an emissary has agreed to meet at Razor Hill that night. Sensing a trap, Rexar offers to go in Thrall's place to meet with the humans. Although Thrall is not one to back down from a fight, he reluctantly agrees to let Rexar and his companions go to the meeting. When they arrive, the emissary is surprised that the war chief himself did not arrive, while Rexar comments that Jaina herself did not come to the meeting. Confused as to why Jaina would be there, the emissary calls to spring their ambush, but Rexar's party would not be caught off guard. Fighting back, they overpower their would-be assassins and attempt to question the emissary, but ultimately get no information out of him. Thrall is in disbelief that Jaina would betray their pact as she has, and attempting to lure him into a trap. Choosing to take a more direct approach, Thrall wishes for Jaina to explain her recent madness. He asks Rexar and his companions to infiltrate her new city on the island of Theramore to the south, providing a zeppelin to transport them to the Darkspear's new village. Rexar, Rokan, and Chen arrive at the new Darkspear village and are greeted by Vol'jin. He warns that Theramore Isle will be difficult to sneak onto as the human fleets are patrolling the waters around the area, but there may be someone that is able to help them. He has already been alerted and is waiting by the dockyard for their arrival. As Rexar's group make their way out from the village, they are attacked by more centaur, and further down the road they find a village burned to the ground with no sign of any survivors. The hoofprints all over the area implied the village was attacked by the centaur, and following the tracks leads them back to their camp. The remaining orcs are being held in cages, and one of them, Mathog, points Rexar in the direction of the centaur's leader, Con Gragtor. Gragtor holds the key to their cages, and after they kill the warlord, they release the captive orcs. With his clan safe, Mathog thanks Rexar and begins to march with his men back to Orgrimmar. Near the humans' shipyard, an orc by the name of Samura waits for Rexar and his group. As a master of stealth, Vol'jin gave him a number of volatile explosives to plant at critical structures around the docks. Once the explosives go off, it will provide enough of a distraction for Rexar to slip through their watch. Rexar, Rokan, and Chen will have to wait behind while Samuro plants the explosives, but before he heads to the docks, there is a personal matter that must be settled first. Samuro's village was torn apart by a vicious wildkin called Bloodbeak the Berserker. Now, as one of the last Blade Masters to continue to wear the banner of the Burning Blade Clan, Samuro's heart desires vengeance. Bloodbeak lives in the nearby hills, and before the day is at its end, Samuro's blade shall taste wildkin blood. Stalking through the hills, Samuro spotted the great beast, and with a few wide swings of his blade, brought it down. His vengeance achieved, Samuro grabs the explosives and makes for the shipyard. Sneaking into the shipyard, Samuro begins to plant the explosives. Positioned around several critical buildings, such as the blacksmith, the barracks, and the docks, the resulting explosions create enough chaos for a small ship to sneak through to Theramore Isle. As they arrive at the gates to the city, Jaina is already waiting for them. Rexar, bearing Thrall's message, demands answers to why Jaina has been encroaching on the Horde's lands and threatening war. Jaina, however, is confused. She doesn't seek Thrall's death, nor does she wish to end the pact they made. Rexar mentions having to get through a large blockade just to reach Theramore, and Jaina asks him to lead her to this base so that they can clear up this entire misunderstanding. Sailing back to the mainland, both parties are surprised to find the human encampment has been burned to the ground and Naga swarming around the area. The Naga slaughtered everyone in the camp and destroyed it, and so Rexar and Jaina begin to look for any survivors. There are no signs of any remaining living humans in the camp, and so Rexar's group is forced to begin exploring the outer-lying wetland region. Somewhere within lies the Naga's lair, and if they had captured any prisoners, it is highly likely that they would have been brought there. If any are still alive, they can confirm whether they serve Jaina's cause or if they have gone rogue from her orders. Fighting through the Naga and the hostile wildlife, Rexar's group tracks their base to some of the old sunken ruins nearby. The Naga, led by Lady Darkscale, had already killed what prisoners they did take by the time they've been found, and Jaina avenges them by culling the remaining serpents. As they survey the ruins, Jaina finds one dying footman who recognizes her before passing away, telling her the Admiral will be happy to see her. Realizing who it is that's leading these men, Jaina quickly teleports them all back to Theramore. Back in Theramore, Jaina begins making preparations to send Rexar back to Thrall with a warning. As she rushes around, she realizes she's already too late as a fleet of ships arrives in the city. News had made its way back to Kultiris that Lordaeron had fallen, and Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, hero of the Second War, had come in search of his daughter. Despite the Horde no longer being a threat to the Alliance, Dalen refuses to see them as anything but the monsters that killed his son and nearly burned the Eastern Kingdoms to the ground. As his forces move to grab Rexar and his group, the three of them flee deeper into the city. Finding a civilian transport, they sneak their way around the city, leaving the safety of their disguise just long enough to open the gates blocking the canals. As they leave the Isle, they see the Admiral's army pointed towards Durotar. If Kultiris wished to attack the Orcs, then Orgrimmar would need allies to stand by their side. Rexar's first stop in search of allies brings him to the verdant plains of Mulgore, where the Tauren that helped Thrall during the Third War have established their new home. Hoping to enlist their help, Rexar approaches their leader, Cairn Bloodhoof, only to find him deep in despair. He sends Rexar to return to Thrall and inform him that both he and his heart are dead. As Cairn's second-in-command, Tagar, informs him of the situation. Cairn's son, Bane, was kidnapped by the Centaur, whose cannibalistic tendencies don't bode well. With Cairn's despair, the Centaur aren't the only problems, as the nearby Harpies have also become a threat to the Tauren's Kodos. The beasts are used for everything from food and raw materials to labor, and the Harpies' poaching has further crippled their tribe. Lending his aid, Rexar deals with the Harpies and returns to Tagar, cursing the wastefulness of the dead avians. Bovin Wind Totem greets Rexar's group as they arrive just outside of the Tauren camp, as they have been informed that he may be able to help them locate Bane. Agreeing to help, Bovin peers into the nearby well, spying on the Centaur encampment. Convinced Bane must be held somewhere inside, Rexar's group fight their way through the camp and kill their Khan. Luckily, Bane is still alive and well, and Rexar promises to get him back to his father safely. The Centaur block the path back out of the camp, and Bane joins the rest in fighting their way back to the rest of the Tauren. At long last, the last of the Centaur falls, and Bane is brought back to his father. Cairn's despair dissipates at the sight of his son, and he realizes that he had been a fool for giving up hope. The Horde has done much for the Tauren, and now that they need their aid, Cairn will not let Thrall down. Not only will the Tauren rally to Orgrimmar's defense, but Cairn joins up with Rexar's party to continue with their mission. A member of the Stonemaul Ogres managed to make his way to the Darkspear village, wounded as he was, asking for help. Their new warlord killed many of their warriors in his climb to power, and Rexar agrees to help them out. Traveling to the Dustwallow Marsh, the ogres initially refuse Rexar entry, but are swiftly killed. Meeting with their warlord Korgal, Rexar asks to join the Stonemaul clan. To prove he is worthy of joining, Korgal tasks Rexar with completing the Trial of Strength by entering a canyon called the Gauntlet and slaying the powerful monsters inside. Once his prey lies dead at his feet, Rexar returns to Korgal to be initiated into the clan. Still, the ogres refuse to join with the Horde again after the failure of the Second War, and by his right as a member of the clan, Rexar challenges Korgal to the Trial of Blood. Within the arena, Rexar claims Korgal's head, becoming the new leader of the Stonemaul, and orders them all to join in the defense of Orgrimmar. Admiral Proudmoore's forces have positioned themselves on the mainland, and Thrall intends on driving them off. To help raise the morale of the troops, he has created a banner of the Horde that he wishes to bless with shamanistic magic. As Rexar searches for the necessary regions, he comes across a number of small dungeons bearing useful loot. These include a forgotten dungeon filled with golems, a sunken cave of hostile beasts, a temple full of greedy and power-hungry mages, and a portal leading to an arena on Outland, where a Doomguard, Dreadlord, and Succubus can be fought for glory and treasure. After retrieving the claw of a wildkin, the eye of a sea giant, and the scale of a bronze drake, Rexar returns to Thrall so that he can complete the blessing. Thrall chooses to gift Rexar with the banner, asking him to carry it into the battle to come, and bestowing upon him the title of Champion of the Horde. The Tauren and Ogre allies have turned the tide in the favor of the Orcs, and Rexar rallies their combined forces against the Admiral's stronghold. Dalen intends on using this as a staging point to launch his attack against Orgrimmar, and rather than waiting for them to come, Thrall wants to take a more direct approach. Rexar leads their forces into battle, wiping out the outer lying camps before pushing his way into the main stronghold. Even though Dalen himself joins in the fight to attempt to drive the Horde away, Rexar's forces smash their way into the stronghold, leaving nothing but rubble and dismantling the Admiral's primary castle. In the end, Dalen's forces retreat back to Theramore Isle, and the Horde stands victorious. So long as he lives, he will never stop hunting the Orcs, and so Thrall has no choice but to lay siege to Theramore. In his heart, he hopes that Jaina managed to get to safety, as she is in no way responsible for her father's actions. Following the Lord Admiral's trail, Thrall and Rexar lead the Horde to the coast and begin their preparations for their siege of Theramore. As they look out across the water, however, they see that Dalen has established a blockade of warships around the isle, meaning that any attacks they launch across the water will be blown to the bottom of the ocean. As Thrall and Rexar plan their next moves, Jaina teleports to meet with the two of them and beg for their mercy. She has had no part in any of her father's plans, and that she wishes that none of this had ever happened to begin with. Although Thrall and Jaina fought and bled together against the Legion, her father's actions threaten the security of the Horde, and so he cannot simply stand by. She agrees not to get in their way, but asks that Thrall not harm the people of Theramore, as although Dalen may use their forces against them, her people are innocent. As she leaves, Jaina mentions a nearby goblin shipyard that may be able to help them breach the blockade. Rexar and his party make landfall on a small island just off the coast where the Kultiran fleet has established their primary base. Together they manage to carve their path through the human soldiers, dismantling the base and freeing the goblin shipyard that is set up nearby. Purchasing a number of warships of their own, as well as a few transport ships, Rexar and his party moves between each of the remaining islands in the area, slaughtering the Kultirans on land while their warships scour the seas and fight against the Kultiran fleet. Once the last of the human warships has been blown apart, Thrall rallies his forces into their transport ships and leads them to Theramore Isle. When they arrive, they find the humans have deeply fortified the isle, and Thrall calls for his warriors to force their way through and storm the citadel. Cairn, along with Chen and Rokan, look to Rexar to lead them into the battle to come. The soldiers of the Horde throw themselves against the Kultiran resistance, trying to push their way deeper into Theramore Isle, while Rexar joins the fray, cleaving through soldiers and bringing down their defensive towers. Him and his group move throughout the streets, helping out each of the invasion routes fight through Daelin's forces, all while avoiding any harm to the civilians of Theramore. As they confront Daelin himself, the Lord Admiral admitted that he had expected the Orcs to have turned on each other by now, but Thrall spits back that his horde is not the same one from the Second War. They have paid for their past sins with blood, but in Daelin's eyes, the Orcs can never atone for all the innocents they slaughtered. He vows that he will never stop hunting them, cursing the Orcs until Rexar brings down his axe and silences the Lord Admiral forevermore. As her father falls, Jaina rushes to his side, crying over him. Rexar comforts her, telling her that above all else, her father was a fierce warrior up until the bitter end. With no other quarrels, the Orcs leave Theramore in peace and return to Durotar. As Thrall leads his forces back to their new home, he turns to Rexar and offers him a place among them. Rexar, however, refuses to make his home in Orgrimmar, for he is one of the Mok'Nathal, and as such his place is among the beasts and wilderness of the land. Yet as he leaves, he reassures Thrall that should they ever have need of him, he will always be a member of the Horde. The Kultiran fleet made their way back to their home, telling their people of the events that transpired. They cried out for vengeance, but this only strained their relationship with what remained of the Alliance. Furious, Kultiras would isolate themselves from their former allies and harbor a hatred of the one who betrayed their people. Their party now broken, Cairn returned to his people in Mulgore, while Rokan returned with Thrall to Orgrimmar, remaining loyal to his service. Chen remained for a time in Orgrimmar, continuing to perfect his brews before he would leave again to continue his journeys. Along with Misha, Rexar returned to the wilderness of Kalimdor, traveling among the savage lands for years to come.